The courtroom door slammed shut behind her, and Lena Carter felt the weight of 6 years collapse onto her shoulders in a single breath. Across the polished wooden floor sat a man she hadn't seen since the night everything changed, the night her sister died and left behind a 3-month-old baby with no one else to turn to. He wore an expensive suit now, his lawyer beside him, both of them looking at her like she was nothing more than an obstacle to remove. The judge's gavel hadn't fallen yet, but Lena could already feel the ground shifting beneath her feet. She had given up everything, her career, her friendships, every chance at love, to raise a child who wasn't legally hers. And now, in one cold procedural motion, it could all be taken away. But this story doesn't begin in that courtroom. It begins 6 weeks earlier, on a rainy November night, when a wounded stray dog and a routine act of kindness cracked open a door Lena had kept locked for years. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. And if it moves you, hit that like button. Let's begin. The rain came down in sheets that Thursday night, turning the streets of Maplewood into rivers of reflected streetlights and blur. Daniel Hayes stood behind the front desk of his small veterinary clinic, wiping down the counter for the third time, trying to ignore the exhaustion pulling at his shoulders. It was nearly 8 o'clock, well past closing time, but he'd learned long ago that being a single father meant there was no such thing as a clean end to the day. His son, Max, sat cross-legged in the corner of the waiting room, headphones on, completely absorbed in whatever game he'd downloaded that week. The boy was 9 now, tall for his age, with Daniel's dark hair and his mother's quiet focus. Daniel watched him for a moment, the way he always did when Max wasn't looking, checking, measuring, making sure the kid was okay. It had been just the two of them for 4 years now, ever since Sarah left. No drama, no fight, just a note on the kitchen table and a forwarding address 2 states away. She'd said motherhood wasn't what she expected, that she needed to find herself. Daniel had found himself too, in sleepless nights, in school pickups, in learning how to braid hair from YouTube videos, in becoming both mother and father to a boy who deserved better than half a parent. He flipped the sign on the door to "closed" and was reaching for his jacket when the handle rattled violently. Someone was outside, pulling at the locked door with desperate urgency. Daniel moved quickly, unlocking it and pulling it open. A young woman nearly fell inside, soaked to the bone, her dark hair plastered to her face. In her arms, wrapped in what looked like an old towel, was a medium-sized dog. Some kind of mixed breed, its fur matted with mud and blood. "Please," she gasped, her voice hoarse. "Please, he's hurt. I found him on the side of the road. I didn't know where else to go." Daniel didn't hesitate. "Bring him back here." He led her through the waiting room, past Max, who looked up briefly, then returned to his game, and into the examination room. The woman laid the dog carefully on the steel table, her hands shaking as she stepped back. Up close, Daniel could see she was younger than he'd first thought, maybe late 20s, early 30s. Her clothes were simple, worn, like someone who didn't spend much time thinking about appearance. But it was her eyes that caught him. They were guarded, careful, the eyes of someone who had learned not to expect much from the world. Daniel moved to the sink, scrubbing his hands. "What happened?" "I don't know. I was driving home and saw him lying near the ditch. He tried to get up when I approached, but his back leg—" Her voice cracked slightly. "I think it might be broken." Daniel examined the animal with practiced efficiency. The dog was conscious, breathing steadily, but clearly in pain. His right hind leg was swollen, possibly fractured. There were also several deep cuts along his side, likely from barbed wire or broken glass. "You did the right thing bringing him in," Daniel said quietly, already preparing a sedative. "He's going to need x-rays, probably surgery to set the leg. These cuts need to be cleaned and sutured." The woman's face went pale. I don't have much money. I can pay something, but..." "Don't worry about it right now," Daniel interrupted gently. "Let's just take care of him first." She looked at him like she didn't quite believe what she was hearing. "You'd do that? For a stray?" "Every life matters," Daniel said simply. "Besides, he's lucky you found him. Most people would have just kept driving." Something flickered across her face then. Surprise maybe, or recognition. As if she understood exactly what it meant to be the person no one else stopped for. Over the next hour, Daniel worked steadily while the woman watched from the corner, her arms wrapped around herself. Max eventually wandered in, curious. and Daniel explained what he was doing in the calm, educational tone he always used with his son. The boy asked good questions, smart questions, and Daniel felt that familiar swell of pride. By 9:30, the dog was stabilized, his legs set in a cast, the wounds cleaned and stitched. He'd need to stay at the clinic for observation, but Daniel was cautiously optimistic. "He's going to be okay," he told the woman as he washed his hands again. "The next 48 hours are critical, but he's strong. He'll pull through." She exhaled, a sound caught between relief and exhaustion. "Thank you. I mean it. Thank you." Daniel dried his hands, studying her. "I'm Daniel, by the way." "Daniel Hayes." "Lena." She hesitated, as if even her own name was something she wasn't used to sharing. "Lena Carter." The name rang a distant bell, something he'd heard in passing around town, but he couldn't place it. Maplewood was small enough that everyone knew everyone's business, but Daniel had learned to tune out most of the gossip. He had enough to deal with. "You live around here?" he asked. "About 10 minutes outside town, the old Gardner property." That's when it clicked. Daniel remembered now. People talked about the woman who lived alone out there, who'd moved in years ago and barely ever came into town except for essentials. There were rumors, of course. There were always rumors. Some said she'd had her heart broken. Others claimed she was running from something. A few suggested she was just strange, antisocial, one of those people who couldn't function in normal society. Looking at her now, standing in his clinic with mud on her shoes and worry etched into every line of her face, Daniel thought none of those stories came close to the truth. "You can come by tomorrow to check on him if you want," Daniel offered. "I'll be here by 7. Lena nodded slowly. "I'd like that, if it's not too much trouble." "No trouble at all." She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "That thing you said earlier, about every life mattering." "Yeah? You really mean that?" Daniel met her eyes. "Every single one." She nodded once, something unreadable passing over her features, and then she was gone, disappearing into the rain-soaked night. Max looked up at his father. "She seemed sad." "Yeah, buddy, I think she did." "Are we keeping the dog?" Daniel smiled. "Not ours to keep, but we'll take care of him until he's ready to go." "Go where?" "I don't know yet. We'll figure it out." Max accepted this with the easy trust of childhood, and together they locked up the clinic and headed home. Lena Carter drove through the rain with both hands tight on the wheel, her mind racing. She couldn't remember the last time she'd spoken that many words to another person. Couldn't remember the last time someone had looked at her without judgment, without curiosity, without that subtle distance people kept when they didn't understand you. Daniel Hayes hadn't looked at her like that. He'd looked at her like she was just another person doing her best. And somehow, that was the kindest thing anyone had done for her in years. When she pulled up to the small farmhouse she'd called home for the past 6 years, the porch light was on. She killed the engine and sat for a moment, letting the rain drum against the roof of her car. Inside that house was everything that mattered, everything she'd given up her life to protect. She gathered her courage and stepped out into the storm. The front door opened before she reached it. Mrs. Brennan, the elderly woman from the neighboring property who helped watch Ava during the day, stood in the doorway with a kind smile. "How'd it go?" she asked quietly. "The dog's going to be okay," Lena said, stepping inside. "The vet was... he was good." Mrs. Brennan patted her arm. "Good. That's good. Ava's been asleep for about an hour. She had dinner, finished her homework, and read me half a book about dolphins." Lena felt her chest tighten with gratitude. "Thank you, Margaret. Really." "Oh, hush! You know I love that girl like my own granddaughter." The older woman pulled on her coat. "You get some rest, dear. You look exhausted." After Mrs. Brennan left, Lena moved through the quiet house, checking locks, turning off lights. She stopped at the doorway of the small bedroom at the end of the hall and looked inside. Ava was curled up in bed, her dark curls spread across the pillow, one small hand tucked under her cheek. She was 5 years old, bright and curious, and so full of life that sometimes Lena had to stop and catch her breath just watching her. This child was everything. The reason Lena got up every morning. The reason she'd walked away from her career, her friends, her entire life in the city. The reason she'd chosen loneliness over risk, isolation over vulnerability. Because 6 years ago, on a night just as cold and rainy as this one, Lena's older sister Emma had died suddenly from an undiagnosed heart condition, leaving behind a 3-month-old baby and no one else to care for her. Emma's boyfriend, Ava's biological father, had disappeared the moment he found out about the pregnancy. No forwarding address, no contact, nothing. Just gone. And Lena, 26 years old and barely keeping her own life together, had made a choice. She'd taken the baby, left her job at the architecture firm, moved to this quiet town where rent was cheap and questions were few, and dedicated every ounce of her energy to giving Ava the childhood she deserved. But there was one problem, one constant shadow that followed them both. Lena had never legally adopted Ava. She'd meant to, had started the process twice, but something always got in the way. Money, time, fear. And now 6 years later, she was still listed only as a guardian. Not a mother? Not in the eyes of the law? It terrified her. Because guardianship could be challenged. Guardianship could be revoked. And if anyone ever came looking, if anyone ever decided they had a better claim to this child, Lena would have to fight with everything she had. And she wasn't sure everything she had would be enough. She pulled Ava's blanket up gently, kissed her forehead, and whispered the same promise she'd whispered every night for 6 years. I'll keep you safe, no matter what. Well, the next morning, Lena arrived at the clinic at 6:55, 2 cups of coffee in hand and her heart beating just a little too fast. She'd told herself it was about the dog, that she just wanted to make sure he was okay. But the truth was, she'd been thinking about Daniel Hayes all night, about the way he'd worked without hesitation, about the quiet kindness in his voice when he'd told her not to worry about the money, about his son sitting in the corner, watching his father with such obvious trust. Daniel was already inside when she knocked. He looked surprised to see her, but pleased. "You're early," he said, unlocking the door. "I brought coffee." She held up the cups awkwardly. "I didn't know how you take it, so I just—" "Black is perfect." He took one, their fingers brushing briefly. "Thank you." She followed him to the recovery area, where the dog lay in a large crate, awake and watching them with wary eyes. His tail gave a single tentative wag when he saw Lena. "He remembers you," Daniel said. Lena knelt down slowly, letting the dog sniff her hand through the bars. "Hey, buddy, you feeling better?" The tail wagged again, stronger this time. "He's doing great," Daniel said. "Ate some food this morning, drank water. The leg should heal clean as long as he doesn't put too much weight on it." Lena felt something loosen in her chest. "That's good. That's really good." They stood there in comfortable silence for a moment, just watching the dog. Then Daniel spoke. "So what happens now? You planning to keep him?" Lena hadn't thought that far ahead. "I don't know. I have a niece at home. She'd love a dog. But I'm not sure I can handle the responsibility right now." "How old's your niece?" 5. Daniel smiled. "Same age as my son was when we got our first pet. It's good for kids, learning to take care of something." "Your wife must appreciate the help," Lena said automatically, then immediately regretted it when she saw Daniel's expression shift. "Just me and Max," he said quietly. "Has been for a while now." "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to—" "It's fine." He waved it off. "What about you? You said you live alone?" Lena hesitated. This was the part where people usually started asking questions, where they started digging, where she had to decide how much to reveal and how much to keep hidden. But there was something about Daniel that made her want to tell the truth. "I live with my niece," she said slowly. "Her mother, my sister, passed away when Ava was a baby. I've been raising her ever since." Understanding dawned in Daniel's eyes. "That's why you moved out here. Why you keep to yourself?" It wasn't a question, but Lena nodded anyway. "People have opinions about single women raising kids alone, about how it should be done. I wanted to give her a stable life without all the noise." "I get that," Daniel said. "More than you know." They looked at each other then, really looked, and Lena felt something she hadn't felt in years. Recognition. The sense that she was talking to someone who understood, who knew what it meant to sacrifice everything for a child who depended on you, who knew what it cost. "Listen," Daniel said after a moment, "the dog's going to need care for the next few weeks. Daily check-ins, medication, bandage changes. If you want to bring Ava by sometime, let her help out. It might be good for both of them." Lena's first instinct was to say no, to keep her distance. to protect the careful walls she'd built around their small, safe life. But something stopped her. Maybe it was the loneliness she'd been carrying for so long. Maybe it was the quiet strength she saw in Daniel's eyes. Maybe it was just exhaustion from holding everything together by herself for 6 years. "Okay," she heard herself say. "I'd like that." Daniel's smile was genuine, warm. "Good. Bring her by tomorrow morning. We'll make it work." Over the next 2 weeks, Lena and Ava became regulars at the clinic. They came every morning before Lena dropped Ava off at kindergarten, and the little girl was immediately enchanted by the recovering dog, whom she promptly named Scout, after her favorite book character. Daniel watched the transformation in both of them. Ava was bright and talkative, asking 100 questions about every animal in the clinic, helping Daniel with small tasks like filling water bowls and brushing the cats in the boarding area. And Lena, who'd seemed so guarded that first night, slowly began to relax. She smiled more, laughed at Ava's antics, let herself exist in the moment instead of constantly looking over her shoulder. Max and Ava became fast friends, despite the age difference. Max took his role as big kid seriously, showing Ava how to properly hold a guinea pig, explaining the difference between dog breeds, reading to her from the animal encyclopedias Daniel kept in the waiting room. And Daniel found himself looking forward to their visits, found himself making excuses to start work earlier, to stay later, just to have a few more minutes of conversation with Lena. She was smart. He learned that quickly. She'd been an architect before Ava, had designed buildings in the city, won awards. She talked about it sometimes, late in the morning when the clinic was quiet and Ava was occupied with Max. There was no bitterness in her voice when she spoke about that old life, just a kind of distant fondness, like remembering a story someone else had told her once. "Do you ever miss it?" Daniel asked one morning, 3 weeks after they'd first met. Lena was sitting cross-legged on the floor of the recovery room, Scout's head in her lap. The dog had made remarkable progress, was almost ready to have the cast removed. She thought about the question for a long moment. "Sometimes I miss the work itself, the creativity, the problem-solving, but I don't miss the life that came with it, the pressure, the constant competition, the feeling that you were only as good as your last project. And now? Now I'm only as good as whether Ava feels safe when she goes to sleep at night, whether she laughs during the day, whether she knows she's loved." Lena stroked Scout's ears gently. "It's simpler, but it matters more." Daniel understood that completely. "Max is the same for me. After Sarah left, I realized I'd been so focused on building the practice, on being successful, that I'd missed a lot of his early years. I can't get that time back, but I can make sure he knows he's my priority now." "It's hard," Lena said quietly, "doing it alone." "Yeah, it is." They sat in silence for a while, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who understood each other, who didn't need to fill every moment with words. Then Ava came running in, Max trailing behind her. "Lena! Lena! Dr. Hayes said Scout might be ready to come home soon. Can we keep him? Please." Lena looked at Daniel, who shrugged with a smile. "He's made a full recovery. Just needs a good home." "Please?" Ava's eyes were wide, hopeful. "I'll take care of him. I'll feed him and walk him and everything." Lena sighed, but she was smiling. Okay, we can keep him." Ava squealed and threw her arms around Lena's neck. Max high-fived her and Scout wagged his tail so hard his whole body shook. And Daniel, watching this small moment of pure joy, realized something had shifted. These people, this woman, this child, this dog, had become part of his life in a way he hadn't anticipated, in a way that felt both terrifying and right. That afternoon, after Lena and Ava left, Max looked up at his father with serious eyes. "Dad?" "Yeah, buddy? I like them, Lena and Ava. I like them too. Do you think—" Max hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Do you think they could be our friends? Like real friends?" Daniel pulled his son into a hug. "I think they already are." But that same evening, 200 miles away in the city, a man named Ryan Foster sat in his cramped apartment, scrolling through social media with growing irritation. He was 34, perpetually broke, perpetually angry at the world for not recognizing his worth. His current girlfriend had just kicked him out again, and he was crashing with a buddy, trying to figure out his next move. That's when he saw the post, shared by a mutual acquaintance, tagged carelessly, showing a little girl at a kindergarten event in some small town called Maplewood. The caption read, "Ava Carter's first school performance, so proud." Ryan stared at the photo, zoomed in, studied the girl's face. She had to be 5, maybe 6, which meant his mind raced backward, doing the math. 6 years ago. Emma, the girlfriend who'd gotten pregnant and whose sister had taken the baby when Emma died. He'd left without looking back, hadn't even gone to the funeral. What was the point? He'd never wanted to be a father, never signed anything, never acknowledged the kid. But now, looking at this picture, a different kind of thought began to form. A kid meant child support, probably government benefits, maybe even a settlement if the sister had money. Ryan opened a new browser tab and started searching. Guardianship laws, parental rights, custody claims. By the time the sun came up, he'd made his decision. He was going to Maplewood, and he was going to get what was his. Lena woke up on a Saturday morning 6 weeks after meeting Daniel to the sound of Ava's laughter floating through the house. She stretched, savoring the rare moment of peace, then padded down the hall in bare feet. Ava was in the living room, building an elaborate tower of blocks while Scout watched from his bed in the corner, tail thumping against the floor. The dog had integrated into their little family seamlessly, as if he'd always belonged there. "Morning, sweetheart," Lena said, dropping a kiss on Ava's head. "Morning. Look, I made it taller than me." The tower was indeed impressive, swaying slightly but holding steady. Lena was about to comment when a knock sounded at the front door. Strange. They almost never had visitors. Lena opened the door to find Daniel standing on the porch, Max beside him. Both were holding paper bags that smelled like fresh pastries. "Morning," Daniel said, looking slightly embarrassed. "I hope it's okay that we just showed up. Max and I were at the bakery and we thought maybe you'd like some company for breakfast." Lena's heart did something complicated in her chest. "You drove all the way out here?" "It's only 10 minutes, Daniel said. "And honestly, Max has been talking about showing Ava his new comic books all week." Ava appeared behind Lena, eyes wide with delight. "Max, did you bring them?" "All 12 issues," Max confirmed proudly. The kids disappeared immediately, leaving the 2 adults standing awkwardly in the doorway. "Come in," Lena said finally. "I'll make coffee." They settled into an easy rhythm, the kind that surprised them both. Daniel helped set the table while Lena brewed coffee. The kids spread out on the living room floor, comics everywhere, voices rising and falling in animated discussion. Scout wandered between rooms, accepting pets from whoever was closest. And for the first time in 6 years, Lena's house felt full. Not crowded, not overwhelming, just full in the way a home should be. "This is nice," Daniel said quietly, watching the kids through the doorway. "Yeah," Lena agreed. It really is. "Listen, I know we haven't known each other that long, but—" Daniel paused, gathering his thoughts. "I just want you to know that if you ever need anything, I'm here. Max and I both are. You don't have to do everything alone." Lena felt her throat tighten. "That means more than you know." "I mean it. Whatever you need." She looked at him then, really looked, and saw something in his eyes that made her want to believe him, want to trust that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to carry everything by herself anymore. "Thank you," she whispered. And in that moment, with sunlight streaming through the windows and children's laughter filling the air, Lena let herself imagine a different future, one where loneliness wasn't her constant companion, one where she had someone to lean on. But that future shattered exactly 1 week later when a certified letter arrived in her mailbox. Ryan Foster, claiming to be Ava's biological father, was filing for custody. The nightmare had begun. Lena's hands trembled as she held the letter, reading the words over and over as if repetition might change their meaning. The paper felt impossibly heavy, like it carried the weight of every fear she'd harbored for 6 years compressed into a single document. Petition for custody. Ryan Michael Foster, biological father. Best interests of the child. Immediate hearing. She sank onto the porch steps, unable to feel her legs. Scout pressed against her side, sensing her distress, but she barely registered his warmth. The morning was bright and clear, birds singing in the trees, the world continuing as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Everything. "No," she whispered to the empty air. "No, no, no." Inside, she could hear Ava singing to herself while she colored, her small voice off-key but full of joy. That sound, that precious, ordinary sound, felt like it was already slipping away. Lena forced herself to breathe, to think. She had to call someone. A lawyer. But she didn't know any lawyers. Didn't have money for a lawyer. Her savings account had maybe $3,000, accumulated slowly over years of careful budgeting and doing without. How far would that go against someone who seemed prepared for a legal battle? Her phone was in her hand before she realized she'd made a decision. She scrolled through her sparse contact list and stopped at a name she'd added only 3 weeks ago. The phone rang twice before Daniel answered. "Hey, Lena. Everything okay?" She tried to speak but couldn't get words past the tightness in her throat. "Lena?" Daniel's voice sharpened with concern. "What's wrong?" Her voice cracked. "Can you come over, please? I don't know what to do." "I'm on my way. 10 minutes." He hung up, and Lena sat there clutching the phone, trying to pull herself together before Ava noticed something was wrong. She couldn't let Ava see her fall apart. Couldn't let fear show on her face. That was rule number 1 of the life she'd built. Always be strong for Ava, no matter what. But inside, she was screaming. Daniel arrived in 8 minutes, pulling into her driveway fast enough to kick up gravel. He took the porch steps 2 at a time, and when he saw her face, he didn't ask questions. He just sat down beside her and waited. Lena handed him the letter. She watched his expression change as he read, saw his jaw tighten, saw something flash in his eyes that looked like anger. "This is the father?" he asked quietly. "The one who left?" He disappeared before Ava was born. Never met her. Never paid a dime. Never even acknowledged she existed. Lena's voice was hollow. "And now he wants custody." Daniel read through the document again, more carefully this time. "He's claiming you're an unfit guardian, says the child needs a stable 2-parent home, that he's now married and financially secure, that..." He stopped, his mouth forming a hard line. "This is garbage, complete garbage." "But it's legal garbage," Lena said. "He has rights, biological rights. And I'm nobody. Not legally. I never adopted her. I kept meaning to, but the process was expensive and complicated, and I kept putting it off because everything was fine. We were fine, and now..." Her voice broke, and Daniel reached over, taking her hand. His grip was solid, real, something to hold on to while the ground fell away beneath her. "This doesn't mean he wins," Daniel said firmly. "Courts care about what's best for the child. You've raised Ava for 6 years. You're her mother in every way that matters. But not on paper." Lena pulled her hand back, wrapping her arms around herself. "On paper, I'm just temporary, disposable. Someone who can be replaced." "Lena, look at me." She did, reluctantly. "You are not disposable. You're the only mother Ava has ever known. No judge is going to ignore that." "You don't know that." The words came out bitter. "You don't know what they'll decide. And I can't..." Her breath hitched. "I can't lose her, Daniel. I can't. She's everything." Before Daniel could respond, the front door opened and Ava appeared, holding up a drawing. "Lena, look! I made you a..." She stopped, noticing the tears on Lena's face. "Why are you crying?" Lena wiped her eyes quickly, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack her face in half. "I'm okay, sweetheart. Just something in my eye." Ava didn't look convinced, but she was 5, easily distracted. "Do you like it? It's you and me and Scout and Dr. Hayes and Max. We're all at the park." The drawing showed 5 stick figures and 1 very round dog, all holding hands under a bright yellow sun. It was perfect and terrible, and Lena had to look away before she started crying again. "It's beautiful, baby. Why don't you go put it on the fridge?" After Ava skipped back inside, Daniel spoke quietly. "You need a lawyer. A good one." "I can't afford a good one. I can barely afford a bad one." "Then we'll figure something out. There are legal aid services, pro bono attorneys, who are overworked and underpaid and handling 100 cases at once." Lena stood abruptly, pacing. "I've looked into it before when I was trying to start the adoption process. The waiting lists are months long. I don't have months. The hearing is in 6 weeks. 6 weeks. The words hung between them like a death sentence. Daniel stood too, his mind clearly working through possibilities. Okay, let me make some calls. I know a few people in town, including someone on the county board. Maybe they can point us towards someone who specializes in family law." "Why are you doing this?" Lena asked suddenly. "Why do you care?" Daniel looked at her like the question itself was incomprehensible. "Because you're my friend. Because Ava's become important to Max, which makes her important to me. Because what's happening here is wrong, and I'm not going to stand by and watch it happen." The certainty in his voice made something inside Lena's chest crack open. She'd been alone for so long, had built such high walls around herself and Ava, that she'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone stand beside her instead of watching from a distance. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me yet. We've got a fight ahead of us." Over the next 3 days, Daniel made good on his promise. He called in favors, reached out to contacts, and somehow managed to connect Lena with a family law attorney named Patricia Chen, who agreed to take the case at a reduced rate after hearing the details. Patricia was in her mid-40s, sharp-eyed and no-nonsense, with a reputation for winning difficult custody cases. She met with Lena in her small office above the hardware store in downtown Maplewood and spent 2 hours going through every detail of the past 6 years. "Tell me about the day Emma died," Patricia said, pen poised over her legal pad. Lena had told this story before, to doctors and social workers and government officials, but it never got easier. "I got a call from the hospital at 2 in the morning. They said my sister had collapsed at home, that the paramedics couldn't revive her. Congenital heart defect, undiagnosed. She was only 28. And Ava was with her?" "Yes. A neighbor heard the baby crying and called 911. By the time I got to the hospital, Emma was gone and Ava was in social services custody." Lena's voice remained steady through sheer force of will. "They asked if I could take her. I said yes, immediately." "What about other family?" "There isn't any. Our parents died in a car accident when I was 19 and Emma was 17. No grandparents, no aunts or uncles. Just us." Patricia made a note. "And Ryan Foster? What contact did he have with Emma during the pregnancy?" "None. She told him she was pregnant and he left the same night. Didn't answer her calls, blocked her number, moved without leaving a forwarding address. Emma tried to find him for a few months, then gave up. She was going to raise Ava alone." "Did he ever pay child support?" "He was never court-ordered to. Emma died before she could file for it." "And in the 6 years since, has he made any attempt to contact you or Ava?" "Not once, not a call, not a letter, nothing, until this." Lena gestured to the custody petition lying on the desk between them. Patricia tapped her pen against her lips, thinking. "His claim is that he's now married, financially stable, and can provide a 2-parent household. Do you know anything about this wife?" "Nothing. I didn't even know he'd gotten married." "I'll have an investigator look into it. We need to know who we're dealing with." Patricia leaned forward. "Lena, I'm going to be honest with you. This case is winnable, but it's not going to be easy. Ryan has biological rights, and some judges give significant weight to that. But you have 6 years of established care, stability, and a clear bond with Ava. That counts for a lot. But will it count for enough? That's what we're going to find out. In the meantime, I need you to start documenting everything. School records, medical records, photos, testimony from teachers and neighbors, anything that shows the life you've built for Ava. We need to paint a picture so clear that no judge could possibly think removing her from your care is in her best interest." Lena nodded, already making mental lists. "Okay, I can do that." "Good. And Lena?" Patricia's expression softened slightly. "I know this is terrifying, but you're not alone in this fight. We're going to do everything we can to keep your daughter with you." "She's my niece," Lena said automatically, the correction reflexive after years of explaining. "No," Patricia said firmly. "She's your daughter. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise." That night, after Ava was asleep, Lena sat at the kitchen table surrounded by 6 years of memories. Report cards showing straight marks for excellence in behavior and steady progress in learning. Vaccination records filled out in Lena's careful handwriting. Photos of birthday parties, school events, ordinary days at the park. A handwritten note from Ava's kindergarten teacher praising her kindness and curiosity. Medical bills for checkups, dental visits, a broken arm from a playground fall 2 years ago, all paid in full by Lena. The evidence of a life lived together, of a child raised with patience and love and sacrifice. But would it be enough? Lena's phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. How are you holding up? She typed back, drowning in paperwork. You? Max wants to know if Ava can come over Saturday. Figured both of you could use some normal. Lena smiled despite everything. Tell him yes. Thank you. Stop thanking me. We're friends. This is what friends do. She stared at that message for a long time, letting the words sink in. Friends. She'd almost forgotten what that felt like. Saturday came with the kind of perfect autumn weather that made everything feel possible. Daniel picked up Ava mid-morning, and Lena watched from the porch as her daughter climbed into his truck, chattering excitedly to Max about something that had happened at school. I'll have her back by dinner, Daniel promised. Unless you want to come with us. We're just going to the park, maybe get ice cream. Lena hesitated. Part of her wanted to say yes, to hold on to every moment with Ava while she still could. But another part knew she needed to keep working, keep building their case. I have some things to take care of, she said. But thank you. Daniel studied her face. When's the last time you slept? I sleep. More than 3 hours at a time. Lena didn't answer. Right. That's what I thought. Daniel pulled out his keys and handed them to her. My house is unlocked. Go there, use the guest room, and sleep for a few hours. I'm serious, Lena. You can't fight this battle if you collapse from exhaustion. I can't just... Yes, you can. The kids are with me. You have nothing else you need to do right this second except take care of yourself. His voice was gentle but firm. Please. She wanted to argue, but the exhaustion was so heavy she could barely think straight. Okay, maybe just an hour. Take as long as you need. Daniel's house was a small ranch-style home about 15 minutes from Lena's property, with a neat yard and a well-worn basketball hoop in the driveway. Inside, it was comfortably cluttered with the evidence of a life being lived. Max's school projects on the fridge, veterinary journals stacked on the coffee table, a collection of baseball caps hung by the door. It felt like a home. Not just a house where people slept, but a place where people lived and laughed and belonged. Lena found the guest room and lay down, intending to rest for just a few minutes. But the moment her head hit the pillow, sleep pulled her under like a wave. She woke 4 hours later to the sound of voices in the kitchen. For a moment, disoriented, she couldn't remember where she was. Then it came back. Daniel's house, the custody case, the fear that sat like a stone in her stomach. She found them all in the kitchen. Daniel was making sandwiches while Max and Ava sat at the table, apparently in the middle of a very serious discussion about whether dinosaurs could beat robots in a fight. Dinosaurs have teeth and claws, Ava insisted. But robots have lasers, Max countered. Not all robots have lasers. The cool ones do. Daniel looked up and smiled when he saw Lena. Hey, feeling better? I didn't mean to sleep that long. You needed it. Sandwich? They ate together, the conversation flowing easily between bites. Ava told a long, winding story about a frog she'd seen at the park. Max explained his latest science project. Daniel asked questions, made jokes, kept everything light. And for just a little while, Lena let herself pretend everything was normal, that there was no custody battle looming, that this, sitting around a kitchen table with people who cared about her, was just her regular life. But reality came crashing back when they returned to Lena's house and found a car parked in her driveway. A man stood on the porch holding an envelope. Lena Carter, he called out. Lena's blood went cold. Yes? You've been served. He handed her the envelope and walked away without another word. Daniel was out of the truck immediately, taking the envelope from her shaking hands. He opened it while Lena got Ava inside, trying to keep her voice steady as she asked Ava to go play in her room. When she came back out, Daniel's face was grim. They've moved up the hearing, he said, 3 weeks instead of 6, and they're requesting a home study evaluation. What does that mean? It means a social worker is going to come inspect your home, interview you and Ava, assess the living situation. It's standard in custody cases, but what? Daniel's jaw clenched. But it also means they're serious about this. They're not just filing paperwork hoping you'll give up. They're actually trying to win. Lena felt the world tilt. 3 weeks. She had 3 weeks to prove she deserved to keep the child she'd raised for 6 years. 3 weeks to fight against biological rights and legal precedent and a system that didn't always see what mattered most. I need to call Patricia, she said numbly. I'll stay with you. You don't have to. Lena, Daniel's voice was firm. I'm staying. Patricia answered on the second ring and listened as Lena explained the new developments. There was a long pause before she spoke. This is aggressive. They're trying to throw you off balance, make you panic and make mistakes. Don't let them. We're going to prepare for this home study like our lives depend on it, because in a very real sense, they do. Over the next week, Lena's house became a hub of activity. Patricia sent over a checklist of things to prepare. Daniel helped her go through every room, making sure everything was clean, organized, safe. Max and Ava helped too, though they didn't fully understand why. Lena had told Ava only that some people needed to see the house to make sure it was nice, which was technically true. Margaret Brennan, the elderly neighbor, provided a written statement about the past 6 years, describing Lena as a devoted, loving parent who had sacrificed everything for Ava's well-being. Ava's kindergarten teacher, Mrs. Morrison, did the same. So did the pediatrician who'd seen Ava for every checkup and illness since she was 3 months old. Daniel wrote a statement too, describing what he'd witnessed over the past 2 months. A child who was happy, healthy, deeply bonded to her guardian. A woman who put her daughter's needs above her own without hesitation. When he showed it to Lena, she read through it twice, her eyes stinging. This is too much, she whispered. You're doing too much. I'm doing exactly what needs to be done. Why? She asked again, the question she'd asked before. Why do you care this much? Daniel was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. When Sarah left, I felt like I'd failed. Like if I'd been a better husband, a better father, she wouldn't have wanted to leave. And for a long time, I carried that guilt around like it was my job to hold on to it. Lena waited, sensing there was more. But then I watched you with Ava. Watched you give up everything, your career, your social life, any chance at a relationship, to raise a child who wasn't even yours by birth. And you did it without hesitation, without resentment, without expecting anything in return. That's not failure, Lena. That's the opposite of failure. That's what real love looks like. His voice softened. So when I see someone threatening to take that away from you, threatening to punish you for being exactly the kind of parent every child deserves, it makes me angry, and I'm not going to stand by and let it happen. Lena couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but stare at this man who'd somehow become essential to her life in the span of 2 months. Thank you, she finally managed. Stop thanking me. I don't know what else to say. Then don't say anything, just let me help. The home study evaluator arrived on a Tuesday morning. Her name was Susan Kirkland, and she carried a clipboard and wore an expression that gave away nothing. Lena had prepared for this. The house was spotless. Ava's room was neat but lived in, with her drawings on the walls and her books organized on shelves. The kitchen was stocked with healthy food. Every smoke detector worked. Every safety precaution was in place. Susan walked through each room methodically, taking notes. She asked to see where Ava slept, where she played, where she did homework. She checked the locks on the windows, the temperature of the water heater, the contents of the medicine cabinet. Then she sat down with Lena at the kitchen table. Tell me about your relationship with Ava, Susan said. Lena had practiced this answer 100 times, but now that the moment was here, the rehearsed words felt wrong. So she spoke from the heart instead. Ava is my whole world. She has been since the night Emma died and I held her for the first time. She was so small, so helpless, and she'd already lost so much. I couldn't give her back her mother, but I could give her everything else. Love, stability, a home where she felt safe. That must have required significant sacrifice. It wasn't a sacrifice. It was a choice. And I'd make it again without hesitation. Susan made a note. What about your support system? Family, friends, community connections? I have neighbors who help. Margaret Brennan, who lives next door, watches Ava sometimes. And recently I've become friends with Daniel Hayes. He's a veterinarian in town. His son and Ava have become close. Anyone else? Lena hesitated. This was the hard part, admitting how isolated she'd become. Not really. I moved here to give Ava a quiet, stable life away from the chaos of the city. I focused on her needs rather than building a social network for myself. Some might argue that isolation isn't healthy, that a child needs to see their parent engaging with community, building relationships. The criticism stung, but Lena kept her voice steady. I made the best choices I could with the resources I had. Maybe they weren't perfect, but they were always made with Ava's best interests in mind. Susan asked more questions about finances, about discipline strategies, about Ava's emotional development. Then she asked to speak with Ava alone. Lena's heart hammered as she waited in the living room while Susan and Ava talked in the kitchen. She could hear Ava's voice, bright and animated, but couldn't make out the words. After 20 minutes, Susan emerged. Thank you for your time, Ms. Carter. My report will be submitted to the court within the week. Can you tell me? Lena stopped, knowing the answer before she asked. Never mind. Susan's expression softened just slightly. I can see that Ava is well cared for. That's all I can say right now. After she left, Lena called Patricia. How did it go? The lawyer asked. I don't know. She gave nothing away. That's normal. Try not to read too much into it. We just have to wait for the report. Waiting. Everything was about waiting now. Waiting for reports. Waiting for the hearing. Waiting to find out if her entire life was about to be torn apart. That night, after Ava was asleep, Lena sat on the back porch with Scout at her feet. The dog had grown fond of these quiet evening moments, seemed to sense when Lena needed company without conversation. Her phone rang. Daniel. Hey, he said. Just checking in. How are you doing? I'm terrified, Lena admitted. The evaluator gave me nothing. I have no idea if I said the right things, if the house looked okay, if Ava… Lena, stop. You did fine. Better than fine. Anyone who spends 5 minutes with you and Ava can see how strong that bond is. But what if that's not enough? What if the court decides biology matters more than 6 years of love and care? What if you drive yourself crazy with what-ifs and can't function when you actually need to? Daniel's tone was gentle but firm. You can't control what the evaluator writes or what the judge decides. You can only control how you show up. And you're showing up for Ava every single day, just like you have for 6 years. That has to count for something. Lena closed her eyes, letting his words sink in. I'm scared, Daniel. I know, but you're not alone. Remember that. They talked for another hour, about nothing and everything. Daniel told her about a difficult surgery he'd performed that day. Lena told him about a drawing Ava had made at school. Normal conversation, ordinary life, a lifeline to hold on to while everything else felt like it was falling apart. When they finally hung up, Lena felt fractionally better. Not okay, not even close to okay, but stable enough to face another day. The home study report arrived 6 days later. Patricia called as soon as she received it. It's good, she said, and Lena could hear the relief in her voice. Not perfect, but good. Susan noted that the home is clean and safe, that Ava appears happy and well-adjusted, that you demonstrate appropriate parenting skills and a strong bond with the child. What about the not perfect part? She mentioned your limited support system as a potential concern, suggested that increased community engagement might be beneficial, but she didn't recommend removal from your care, which is what matters. Lena exhaled. Okay, that's something. It's more than something. It's ammunition. Now we just need to be ready for the hearing. 2 weeks to go, 14 days to prepare for the fight of her life. Daniel helped her practice answering questions, playing the role of opposing counsel so she'd be ready for anything. Max and Ava continued their playdates, blissfully unaware of the battle raging in the adult world. Margaret Brennan brought over casseroles and words of encouragement. Patricia worked late hours building their case, and slowly, Lena began to feel something she hadn't felt since this nightmare started. Hope. Maybe Daniel was right. Maybe 6 years of love would count for more than biology. Maybe the system would work the way it was supposed to. But then, 4 days before the hearing, Patricia called with news that shattered that fragile hope. Ryan Foster's lawyer has submitted new evidence, she said grimly. Financial records showing he's making 6 figures at a tech company. Photos of a large house in a good school district. Character references from his employer and neighbors. And a statement from his wife claiming she's excited to be a mother to Ava. Lena felt sick. So he's made himself look perfect. On paper, yes. But we have something he doesn't. What's that? The truth. And 4 days to make sure everyone in that courtroom knows it. The 4 days before the hearing passed in a blur of preparation and mounting dread. Patricia worked tirelessly, building counterarguments to every piece of evidence Ryan's team had submitted. She brought in a child psychologist to evaluate Ava's attachment patterns, a financial expert to demonstrate that Lena's modest income was more than adequate for the child's needs, and a former colleague from Lena's architecture days to testify about the career she'd sacrificed. But every night, Lena lay awake staring at the ceiling, her mind spiraling through worst-case scenarios. She imagined Ava being taken from her arms, screaming for the only mother she'd ever known. Imagined watching her daughter disappear into a stranger's car. Imagined a life stretching forward empty and meaningless without the child who'd given her purpose. On the morning of the hearing, Lena stood in front of her closet for 20 minutes, unable to decide what to wear. Everything felt wrong, too casual, too formal, too bright, too dark. Finally, she settled on a simple navy dress and cardigan, the kind of outfit that said responsible adult without trying too hard. Her hands shook as she buttoned the cardigan. A knock at the door made her jump. She found Daniel on the porch, dressed in a suit she'd never seen him wear before. He looked uncomfortable in it, kept tugging at the collar, but his expression was steady and determined. "Ready?" he asked. "No, but I don't have a choice, do I?" "You're going to do great. Just tell the truth. That's all you have to do." Lena had arranged for Margaret to watch Ava during the hearing. She told her daughter only that she had an important meeting, nothing more. Ava had accepted this easily, more interested in the cookies Margaret had promised to bake than in where Lena was going. The goodbye was torture. Lena held Ava close, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo, memorizing the weight of her small body. "I love you, sweetheart," she whispered into Ava's hair. "Love you too. Don't be gone too long, okay? I'll be back as soon as I can." Ava pulled away and ran inside Margaret's house without looking back, her mind already on cookies and cartoons. She had no idea this might be the last normal morning she'd have with the only mother she'd ever known. The courthouse was a stern brick building in the center of town, the kind of place that had witnessed decades of human drama. Divorces, disputes, lives being torn apart and occasionally stitched back together. Lena climbed the steps with Daniel beside her, Patricia waiting at the top. "Remember what we talked about?" Patricia said as they walked toward the courtroom. "Stay calm, answer questions directly, don't let them bait you into emotional responses. The judge is Martha Hendricks. She's fair, thorough, and has a reputation for putting children's needs first. That works in our favor." They pushed through the heavy wooden doors into the courtroom. It was smaller than Lena had imagined, with rows of benches and a raised platform where the judge would sit. On the opposite side of the room, she saw him for the first time in 6 years. Ryan Foster looked different than she remembered. He'd filled out, lost the hungry edge he'd had when he was with Emma. His suit was expensive, his haircut professional. Beside him sat a woman in her early 30s with carefully styled blonde hair and a nervous smile. His wife, presumably. And next to her, a lawyer in an even more expensive suit who was shuffling through papers with practiced efficiency. Ryan's eyes met Lena's across the courtroom. She tried to read his expression, looking for some hint of doubt, some recognition of what he was doing. But all she saw was entitlement, the look of a man who believed he deserved something simply because biology said it was his. All rise for the Honorable Judge Martha Hendricks. Everyone stood as the judge entered. She was a woman in her late 50s with steel gray hair and sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She settled into her seat and gestured for everyone to sit. "This is a hearing to determine custody of the minor child, Ava Marie Carter, currently under the guardianship of her maternal aunt, Lena Marie Carter. Mr. Foster is petitioning for full custody based on his biological parental rights. Ms. Carter is contesting this petition." Judge Hendricks looked over her reading glasses at both parties. "Before we begin testimony, I want to make something very clear. This court's only concern is the best interest of the child, not what's fair to the adults, not who has more money or a bigger house. What matters is what serves Ava's emotional, physical, and psychological well-being. Is that understood?" Both lawyers nodded. "Good. Mr. Jacobson, you may proceed with your opening statement." Ryan's lawyer stood, buttoning his jacket. He was smooth, polished, the kind of attorney who'd won more cases than he'd lost. "Thank you, Your Honor. This case is about a father who made mistakes in his youth but has spent the past several years turning his life around." Ryan Foster was 28 when he learned of his daughter's existence through her birth to his then-girlfriend, Emma Carter. Faced with the overwhelming prospect of fatherhood at a tumultuous time in his life, he made the regrettable decision to step away. Lena's fingernails dug into her palms. Regrettable decision. As if abandoning a pregnant woman was just a minor error in judgment. Jacobson continued. However, Mr. Foster has since matured significantly. He's built a successful career in software development, earning a substantial income that would provide Ava with educational opportunities, extracurricular activities, and financial security. He's married to a wonderful woman, Jessica Foster, who is eager to provide maternal care. They own a 4-bedroom home in an excellent school district. They can offer Ava the stable 2-parent household that every child deserves. He paused for effect. Ms. Carter, while well-intentioned, is a single woman with limited income, limited support system, and no legal relationship to the child beyond temporary guardianship. Mr. Foster is seeking to correct his past mistakes and provide his biological daughter with the life she deserves. We believe that's in Ava's best interest, and we're confident this court will agree. He sat down, and Lena felt her stomach turn. The way he'd framed it, she sounded like a placeholder, someone keeping Ava warm until her real parent showed up to claim her. Patricia stood next, and her voice was clear and strong. Your Honor, this case is indeed about what's best for Ava. And what's best for Ava is to remain with the only parent she's ever known. Lena Carter didn't just step in when Emma died, she stepped up. She left her career, her home, her entire life to ensure that a 3-month-old baby would never feel abandoned or unloved. For 6 years, she has been the person who bandages scraped knees and reads bedtime stories and attends parent-teacher conferences. She's the one Ava calls for when she has a nightmare. She's the one who knows that Ava is afraid of thunder, but loves rain. That she's allergic to strawberries. That she needs her stuffed elephant to fall asleep. Patricia's voice grew firmer. Mr. Foster may have biological ties to this child, but he has no relationship with her. He doesn't know her favorite color or her best friend's name. He's never attended a single school event or doctor's appointment. He's never been there on a bad day or a good one. And now, after 6 years of absence, he wants to walk in and claim custody because he's decided fatherhood might be convenient now. She looked directly at the judge. Ava has already lost one parent. This court should not force her to lose the only one she has left. Patricia sat down, and for a moment the courtroom was silent. Judge Hendricks made a note on her legal pad. Mr. Jacobson, call your first witness. The petitioner calls Ryan Foster to the stand. Ryan walked to the witness box with confident strides, placed his hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. Lena watched him, this man who'd walked away from Emma without a second thought, and felt a cold rage building in her chest. Jacobson approached the stand. Mr. Foster, can you tell the court about your current life circumstances? Of course, I work as a senior developer at Tech Vision Solutions, where I've been employed for 3 years. My annual salary is $130,000. My wife Jessica is a registered nurse. We own our home outright, and we've been married for 18 months. And why are you seeking custody of Ava now? Ryan's expression shifted to something that might have looked like sincerity to someone who didn't know better. When Emma died, I was in a very dark place in my life. I was struggling with substance abuse, unemployment, instability. I knew I couldn't be the father a child needed, so I stayed away. I thought that was the right thing to do. Lena nearly laughed out loud at the audacity. He'd stayed away because he couldn't be bothered, not because of some noble self-sacrifice. But over the past few years, I've worked hard to better myself, Ryan continued. I got sober, got therapy, built a career. When I met Jessica and we started talking about starting a family, I realized I had a daughter out there who deserved to know her father, who deserved the stability and opportunities I can now provide. How do you envision your relationship with Ava developing? I understand it will take time. I'm prepared to be patient, to earn her trust. But I believe every child deserves to know their biological parent when that parent is willing and able to provide proper care. I want to give Ava a real family, a mother and a father, siblings, eventually. A home where she'll never have to worry about money or stability. Jacobson nodded. No further questions. Patricia stood for cross-examination, and her expression was razor-sharp. Mr. Foster, you said you stayed away because you were struggling. When exactly did you get sober? Ryan shifted slightly. About 4 years ago? So 2 years after Emma's death? Yes. And in those 2 years following Ava's birth, did you make any attempt to contact Ms. Carter to inquire about your daughter's well-being? No, but I was in no condition to— A simple yes or no, please. Did you attempt any contact? No. And after you got sober 4 years ago, did you reach out then? Ryan hesitated. Not immediately. In fact, you didn't reach out at all until 3 months ago. Is that correct? I wanted to make sure I was in the right place first. Patricia's voice was ice. 4 years wasn't long enough to make sure? What changed 3 months ago that suddenly made you ready for fatherhood? Ryan's jaw tightened. I got married. Jessica and I talked about having children, and I realized I already had a child who needed me. Or perhaps you realized that having a child might be easier than having a baby, that you could skip the sleepless nights and dirty diapers and go straight to the parts of parenting that are convenient for you? Objection, Jacobson called. Argumentative. Sustained. Ms. Chen, please rephrase. Patricia didn't miss a beat. Mr. Foster, have you ever changed Ava's diaper? No. Fed her a bottle in the middle of the night? No. Taken her to a doctor's appointment? No. Comforted her when she was sick or scared? No, but have you ever had a single conversation with your daughter? Ryan's face flushed. I haven't had the opportunity. Because you chose not to create one. You chose to walk away 6 years ago, and you chose to stay away even after you were supposedly in a position to be a father. Isn't that the truth? I was trying to do what was best for you, Mr. Foster, not what was best for Ava. Objection. Withdrawn. Patricia returned to her seat, and Lena could see that she'd landed her blows. Ryan looked rattled, defensive, exactly what they needed him to look like. The next witness was Jessica Foster. She took the stand looking nervous but determined, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Jacobson approached her gently. Mrs. Foster, can you tell the court about your desire to be part of Ava's life? I've always wanted to be a mother, Jessica said softly. When Ryan told me about Ava, my heart just broke thinking about this little girl growing up without knowing her father. I want to help give her the family she deserves. Are you prepared for the challenges of raising a child who doesn't know you? Yes. I've done research on attachment and bonding with older children. I've spoken to therapists. I'm committed to doing whatever it takes to make Ava feel safe and loved in our home. Patricia's cross-examination was more measured with Jessica, but no less effective. Mrs. Foster, have you ever met Ava? No, not yet. Have you ever had a conversation with her, even on the phone? No. Do you know anything about her personality, her interests, her fears? Jessica faltered. I know she's 5 years old. She's in kindergarten. Ryan showed me some pictures. Pictures provided by whom? I'm not sure. Social media, I think. So you know what she looks like, but you don't actually know Ava as a person. Not yet, but— And you believe you're prepared to immediately step into a maternal role with a child you've never met. I'm willing to try. Trying is admirable, Mrs. Foster. But Ava already has someone who's done more than try. She has someone who's succeeded at being her mother for 6 years. Why should this court disrupt that? Jessica had no answer. The morning session continued with more witnesses from Ryan's side. His boss praising his work ethic, a neighbor describing the lovely home, a therapist confirming Ryan's progress in recovery. All of it designed to paint a picture of a man who'd turned his life around and deserved a second chance. But none of them could answer the one question that mattered: how any of this served Ava's needs rather than Ryan's desires. During the lunch recess, Lena sat in a small conference room with Patricia and Daniel, unable to eat the sandwich Daniel had brought her. You're doing great, Patricia said. He's looking increasingly like someone who wants to play house, not someone who actually understands what parenting means. But what if the judge thinks his resources matter more than my love? Lena's voice cracked. What if money in a 2-parent home outweigh 6 years of actual care? Daniel reached across the table and took her hand. Then we make sure she understands exactly what those 6 years mean. We make sure she knows who Ava's real mother is. The afternoon session began with Lena on the stand. Her legs felt weak as she walked to the witness box, but she kept her head high. This was it. This was where she fought for her daughter. Patricia approached with a gentle expression. "Ms. Carter, can you tell the court about the day Emma died?" Lena took a deep breath and began. She told them about the phone call in the middle of the night, about racing to the hospital only to find her sister already gone, about holding Ava for the first time, this tiny, helpless creature who'd lost her mother before she could even remember her face. "What went through your mind in that moment?" Patricia asked. "That she needed me, that I was all she had, and that I would do whatever it took to make sure she never felt alone." "Tell us about the sacrifices you made." Lena's voice was steady as she listed them. The job she'd quit, the career she'd abandoned, the apartment she'd given up, the friends who'd drifted away when she moved to a town where she knew no one, the relationships she'd never pursued because Ava had to come first, the sleepless nights, the constant worry, the fear that she wasn't good enough, wasn't doing enough. "Would you make the same choices again?" Patricia asked. "Without hesitation, every single one." "Why?" "Because Ava isn't a burden I took on. She's the best thing that ever happened to me. She gave my life purpose and meaning. She taught me what unconditional love actually means, and I would give up 1,000 careers, 1,000 opportunities if it meant keeping her safe and loved." Patricia let that statement hang in the air for a moment. No further questions. Jacobson stood for cross-examination, and his tone was sharper than it had been with his own witnesses. "Miss Carter, you've painted a very noble picture of sacrifice, but isn't it true that you're isolated out here, that you have very few friends or support systems?" "I have support. My neighbor Margaret, Daniel Hayes and his son, Ava's teachers, but you've acknowledged in the home study report that your social connections are limited. Don't you think a child benefits from seeing their parent engaged with community, building relationships?" "Ava sees me building the relationship that matters most, the one with her." "Come now, Ms. Carter, surely you can admit that your lifestyle is somewhat isolated, possibly even lonely?" Lena felt a flash of anger. "I chose stability over socializing. I chose to focus on Ava's needs rather than my own desire for a vibrant social life. That's called being a parent, or it's called being unable to maintain adult relationships while raising a child alone. Which raises the question, are you truly equipped to give Ava everything she needs, or are you simply doing the best you can with limited resources?" Every parent does the best they can with what they have. The question isn't whether I have a big house or a high income. The question is whether Ava is happy, healthy, and loved. And the answer to that is yes. Jacobson changed tactics. "Ms. Carter, you never legally adopted Ava. Why not?" This was the question Lena had been dreading. "I intended to. I started the process twice, but it's expensive and complicated, and She stopped, hearing how it sounded, like she hadn't cared enough to make it official. "You put it off," Jacobson said. "Despite knowing that without legal adoption, your status as guardian could be challenged." "I put it off because I was working 2 jobs to keep us afloat, because every spare dollar went to food and rent and Ava's needs, because the legal fees were more than I could afford without going into debt that would hurt our stability." "But if you'd prioritized it, you could have found a way." Patricia stood. "Objection. The question of why adoption wasn't finalized doesn't change 6 years of established care and attachment." "Sustained. Move on, Mr. Jacobson." But the damage was done. Lena could see the doubt flickering across the judge's face, the question of why. If she'd really been committed, she hadn't made it legal. Jacobson pressed harder. "Ms. Carter, can you provide Ava with the same educational opportunities Mr. Foster can? Private schools, tutors, college savings?" "I can provide her with a mother who shows up, who knows her, who's been there for every important moment of her life." "That's not what I asked." "Then no. I can't match his income. But Ava doesn't need expensive schools. She needs consistency. She needs love. She needs the person who's raised her to keep raising her." "And what about when she's older? When she realizes what she's missed out on by being raised in poverty instead of comfort?" Lena's eyes blazed. "We're not in poverty. We have a safe home, healthy food, everything we need. And what Ava will realize when she's older is that she was raised by someone who chose her every single day, not by someone who showed up 6 years late looking to play daddy." Ms. Carter, I'm not done. Lena leaned forward, her voice shaking with emotion. You can dress this up however you want. You can talk about money and houses and two-parent homes. But what you're really asking is whether biology matters more than love. Whether a man who's never met his daughter has more right to raise her than the woman who's been her mother since she was 3 months old. And if this court decides the answer is yes, then it's not serving Ava's best interests. It's serving Ryan Foster's ego. Judge Hendrick's gavel came down sharply. Ms. Carter, please limit your responses to the questions asked. But Lena could see that her words had landed. The judge's expression had shifted, become more thoughtful. After Lena stepped down, Daniel took the stand. He described what he'd witnessed over the past 3 months. The bond between Lena and Ava, the sacrifices Lena made without complaint, the way Ava lit up around her aunt. He spoke clearly and honestly, and when Jacobson tried to suggest that his testimony was biased because of his friendship with Lena, Daniel shut it down immediately. I'm biased toward the truth, and the truth is that Ava has a mother who loves her more than anything in this world. Taking her away from Lena would be cruel and traumatic, and it would serve no one's interests except Ryan Foster's. Margaret Brennan testified next, her elderly voice wavering but firm. She described 6 years of watching Lena pour everything she had into raising Ava, of seeing a child grow up happy and secure despite the loss she'd experienced. That girl has never wanted for love, Margaret said, not for one single day. Ava's kindergarten teacher, Mrs. Morrison, confirmed that Ava was well-adjusted, excelling academically, and spoke about Lena with obvious affection. The pediatrician reviewed Ava's medical records, showing that every appointment had been kept, every vaccination current, every illness properly treated. And finally, the child psychologist testified about the evaluation she'd conducted. Her professional opinion was clear and unambiguous. Ava has a secure attachment to Lena Carter. She views Ms. Carter as her primary caregiver and source of emotional security. Disrupting this attachment at this critical stage of development would likely cause significant psychological harm, including anxiety, depression, attachment disorders, and long-term trust issues. Jacobson tried to argue that children were resilient, that Ava could form new attachments. The psychologist wasn't having it. Children are indeed resilient when they have secure attachments to rely on during transitions. Removing Ava's primary attachment figure and placing her with strangers would be the opposite of that. It would be psychological abandonment. By the time the testimony concluded, it was nearly 5 o'clock. Judge Hendricks looked exhausted, her desk covered in notes and exhibits. This court will take the evidence under advisement, she said. I'll review all testimony and documentation and issue a ruling within 2 weeks. This hearing is adjourned. The gavel fell, and Lena felt like her legs might give out. 2 weeks. 14 more days of not knowing whether she'd get to keep her daughter. Outside the courtroom, Patricia pulled her aside. You did well in there. Really well. The psychologist's testimony was powerful, and your own testimony was honest and compelling. But will it be enough? Patricia's expression was serious. I think we have a strong case, but I can't predict what the judge will decide. We just have to wait. Daniel drove Lena back to Margaret's house to pick up Ava. The little girl came running out when she saw Lena's car, completely oblivious to the battle that had been waged over her future. Did you have a good meeting? Ava asked as Lena buckled her into the car seat. It was long, but yes, it was important. Margaret and I made cookies. I saved you 3. Thank you, sweetheart. That night, after Ava was asleep, Lena sat at the kitchen table with Scout's head in her lap, staring at nothing. Daniel had offered to stay, but she'd sent him home. She needed to be alone with her thoughts, needed to face the possibility that this might not end the way she hoped. Her phone buzzed. A text from Patricia. Get some rest. We did everything we could. Now we trust the system. Lena wanted to believe that, wanted to trust that justice would prevail, that love would matter more than biology and money. But she'd lived long enough to know that the world didn't always work that way. The next 2 weeks were agony. Lena went through the motions of normal life, making breakfast, driving Ava to school, going through her daily routines, but her mind was always on the pending decision. Every time her phone rang, her heart stopped. Every time she checked the mail, her hands shook. Daniel called or texted every day, sometimes just to check in, sometimes with practical help. He brought groceries when Lena forgot to shop. He picked up Ava from school when Lena couldn't pull herself together enough to leave the house. He sat with her in comfortable silence when words felt impossible. And slowly, Lena realized something that terrified her almost as much as losing Ava. She was falling in love with him. It wasn't the right time. It wasn't practical or sensible. Her life was hanging by a thread, her future uncertain. But somewhere between the early morning coffee deliveries and the late night phone calls, between watching him play with the kids and seeing him fight for her in that courtroom, she'd let him into her carefully guarded heart. She didn't tell him. Couldn't tell him. Not with everything else hanging in the balance. On day 13, Patricia called. The ruling came through, she said, and Lena couldn't read anything in her voice. And? Judge Hendricks wants to see you in chambers tomorrow at 10 a.m. She'll deliver her decision then. Lena's hands went numb. Just me? Both parties. I'll be there with you. Do you know what she decided? No. But requesting an in-chambers meeting instead of a formal court session usually means she wants to explain her reasoning directly. That could go either way. That night, Lena didn't sleep at all. She lay in bed watching the ceiling, listening to Ava's soft breathing through the baby monitor she still kept on her nightstand, and tried to prepare herself for both outcomes. If she won, she'd have to make good on her promise to finalize the adoption, to build a stronger support system, to give Ava everything she needed. If she lost, she couldn't finish that thought, couldn't let herself imagine it, or she'd fall apart completely. At 9:30 the next morning, Lena stood outside the courthouse again, Daniel beside her. He'd insisted on coming, despite her protests. Whatever happens, he said quietly, you don't face it alone. Patricia arrived, and together they walked into the building. Ryan and his lawyer were already there, sitting on a bench outside the judge's chambers. Ryan looked confident, almost smug. His wife sat beside him, her expression nervous but hopeful. At exactly 10 o'clock, they were called into Judge Hendricks's chambers. The room was smaller than the courtroom, lined with law books and framed credentials. Judge Hendricks sat behind a heavy wooden desk, her expression unreadable. Please, everyone sit down. They did, Lena's heart pounding so hard she could barely hear over the rush of blood in her ears. Judge Hendricks folded her hands on the desk and looked at each of them in turn. I've spent the past 2 weeks reviewing all the evidence presented in this case. The testimony, the reports, the documentation. I've considered the legal precedents, the statutory guidelines, and the welfare standards this court is bound to uphold. This was not an easy decision. Lena couldn't breathe. But ultimately, the question before this court is simple. What serves Ava's best interests? Not what's fairest to the adults, not who has better resources. What serves the child? The judge's eyes settled on Ryan. Mr. Foster, I acknowledge that you have biological ties to Ava. I acknowledge that you've made significant improvements in your life. But biology alone does not make someone a parent. Parenting is showing up, day after day, through the hard moments and the easy ones. It's knowing your child's fears and dreams and needs. It's being the constant, reliable presence in their life. She turned to Lena. Miss Carter, you have been that presence for 6 years. You have sacrificed, struggled, and succeeded in giving Ava a stable, loving home. The evidence clearly shows that Ava is thriving in your care, that she views you as her mother, and that disrupting this relationship would cause her significant harm. Lena's vision blurred with tears. Therefore, this court denies Mr. Foster's petition for custody. Guardianship will remain with Lena Carter. However, Lena's relief crashed into fear at that single word. However, I am ordering Ms. Carter to initiate formal adoption proceedings within 90 days. This limbo cannot continue. Ava deserves the legal security of knowing that her family is permanent and protected. The court will provide resources to assist with legal fees if necessary. Judge Hendricks' gaze moved back to Ryan. Mr. Foster, if you wish to have a relationship with your daughter in the future, that will be Miss Carter's decision to make. As Ava's legal parent, I would suggest that rather than fighting for custody, you consider whether building a relationship slowly, with Ava's best interests in mind, might be a more appropriate path. But that is not a court order, merely a recommendation. She stood, and everyone rose with her. This case is closed. Miss Carter, congratulations. Go home to your daughter. Lena couldn't move, couldn't process what she'd just heard. It took Patricia's hand on her arm to bring her back to reality. "You won," Patricia whispered. "Lena, you won." And then Lena was crying, great gasping sobs of relief and joy and overwhelming gratitude. Daniel's arms were around her, holding her up as her legs finally gave out, and she clung to him like he was the only solid thing in a world that had just shifted back into place. Across the room, Ryan stood frozen, his face red with anger and disbelief. His lawyer was already shepherding him toward the door, probably to discuss appeals, but Lena knew it was over. The judge had made her reasoning clear. There would be no overturning this decision. Ava was hers. Really, truly, permanently hers. Outside the courthouse, the autumn sun felt almost too bright, like the world had been dialed up to a higher intensity while Lena had been trapped in that small chamber. She stood on the steps, still trembling, still trying to process that it was over, that she'd won, that Ava would stay with her. Patricia was already on her phone, probably updating her office, while Daniel stood quietly beside Lena, giving her the space to feel everything rushing through her system. "I need to see her," Lena said suddenly. "I need to see Ava right now." "Then let's go," Daniel said. They drove to Margaret's house in a daze. Lena kept expecting someone to stop her, to tell her there'd been a mistake, that the decision had been reversed, but no one did. The roads were just roads. The trees were just trees. And when they pulled into Margaret's driveway, Ava was just a little girl playing in the front yard with a jump rope, completely unaware that her entire future had just been secured. Ava looked up when she heard the car and immediately dropped the rope, running toward Lena with her arms outstretched. "You're back! You were gone forever!" Lena caught her, lifting her up even though Ava was getting too big for it, burying her face in her daughter's hair and breathing her in. The scent of strawberry shampoo and grass and childhood, the most precious smell in the world. "I missed you so much," Lena whispered. "I missed you too. Margaret says we can have mac and cheese for lunch. Can we, please?" Lena laughed, the sound catching in her throat. "We can have whatever you want, sweetheart." Margaret appeared on the porch, reading Lena's expression immediately. The older woman's face broke into a wide smile, and she pressed her hands together in relief. "Everything's all right then?" she called. "Everything's perfect." That night, after Ava was finally asleep following an extended bedtime routine that involved 3 stories instead of the usual one, Lena sat on the back porch with a cup of tea she wasn't drinking. Scout lay at her feet, and the crickets sang in the darkness, and for the first time in months, Lena felt like she could breathe all the way down to the bottom of her lungs. Her phone buzzed. "Daniel, how are you doing?" She typed back, "Still can't quite believe it's real. Believe it. You did it. You kept your daughter." Lena stared at those words. Your daughter. Not your niece, not your ward, not the child you're raising. Your daughter, she typed. "Thank you for everything. I couldn't have done this without you. Yes, you could have, but I'm glad you didn't have to." The next morning, Lena woke to a new reality. There was no court date looming, no fear shadowing every moment. Just a regular Thursday, with breakfast to make and a kindergartner to get ready for school. But as she was pouring cereal, Ava looked up at her with serious eyes. "Lena, were you sad yesterday?" Lena's hand stilled on the cereal box. She'd tried so hard to hide her emotions from Ava, to protect her from the weight of adult problems, but kids noticed everything. "I was worried about something," Lena said carefully, "but it's all okay now." "What were you worried about?" Lena sat down at the table, meeting Ava's gaze. The child deserved some version of the truth, age-appropriate but honest. "Do you remember how I told you that your mommy Emma was my sister, and when she died I promised to take care of you?" Ava nodded. They'd had this conversation before, in bits and pieces over the years, always gentle, always at Ava's pace. "Well, there was someone who thought maybe you should live with them instead of me, and I had to go to a meeting where people decided if you could stay with me or if you had to go somewhere else." Ava's eyes went wide. "Would I have to leave you?" "That's what I was worried about. But the people at the meeting said you get to stay with me. Forever. Because we belong together." "Forever and ever?" "Forever and ever." Ava seemed to consider this for a moment, then nodded with the easy acceptance of childhood. "Good. Because you're my Lena, and I'm your Ava, and that's how it's supposed to be." Lena's throat tightened. "That's exactly how it's supposed to be." The next few weeks fell into a rhythm that felt almost normal, except for the lightness in Lena's chest where fear and dread had lived for so long. She started the adoption process immediately, with the court's resources making it more financially manageable than she'd ever imagined. Patricia handled the paperwork with the same efficiency she'd brought to the custody case, and Lena signed document after document that would make official what had been true in her heart for 6 years. Daniel continued to be a steady presence in their lives. Max and Ava had their regular playdates, which often turned into the four of them having dinner together or spending Saturday afternoons at the park. It felt natural, easy, like pieces clicking into place. One evening, 3 weeks after the ruling, Daniel and Lena sat on her back porch while the kids played inside with Scout. The air had turned crisp with the approach of winter, and Lena had wrapped herself in a thick cardigan. "Can I ask you something?" Daniel said. "Of course. What are you going to do now? I mean, now that the immediate crisis is over. Have you thought about what comes next?" Lena turned her tea mug in her hands, considering the question. "I've been so focused on just surviving, on keeping Ava, that I haven't let myself think about anything beyond that. Maybe it's time to start thinking about it." "What do you mean?" Daniel leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You gave up a lot to raise Ava. Your career, your dreams, a lot of yourself. And I'm not saying you should regret that. I know you don't. But maybe now that things are stable, you could start reclaiming some of those things. In a way that works with being Ava's mom." "Like what? Going back to architecture?" "Maybe. Or something else. Something that makes you feel like Lena, not just Ava's mom." He paused. "Don't get me wrong, being a parent is incredibly important, but you're allowed to be more than one thing." Lena had been so deep in survival mode for so long that the idea of wanting something for herself felt almost foreign. But as Daniel said it, something stirred in her chest. A small flicker of possibility. "I've thought about it sometimes," she admitted. "Late at night when I can't sleep, I think about designing again. Not for big firms or corporate clients, but maybe residential work, helping people design homes that actually work for their lives." "That sounds perfect for you." "It's just a dream, though. I don't have the connections anymore, don't have a portfolio of recent work. So you build them, slowly, on your own terms." Daniel's voice was encouraging. "You could start small. Maybe pro bono work for people in town who need help. Build a reputation. See where it goes." Lena let the idea settle over her, feeling its weight and shape. It felt good. Scary, but good. "Maybe," she said softly. "Maybe I could." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the last light fade from the sky. Then Daniel spoke again, his voice quieter this time. "Can I ask you something else?" "Sure." "What do you want, Lena? Not for Ava, not for your career, for yourself. For your life." The question hung between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Lena knew what he was really asking. She'd known for weeks, maybe longer, that there was something growing between them. Something neither of them had acknowledged out loud. "I don't know," she said, but it was a lie, and they both knew it. Daniel turned to look at her, his expression serious. "I think you do know. I think you're just afraid to say it." Lena's heart hammered in her chest. "Daniel, I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly. "I'm not trying to pressure you or complicate your life when you're just getting your feet under you. I just want you to know that I'm here, that I'm not going anywhere, and that when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'd like to be more than just your friend." Lena couldn't breathe, couldn't think. All she could do was stare at this man who'd appeared in her life at exactly the right moment, who'd stood beside her when she needed it most, who'd somehow become essential to her in ways she was only beginning to understand. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I know. I haven't let anyone close in so long. I don't know if I remember how." "You let me close already. You just didn't realize it was happening." He was right. Somewhere between the early morning coffee and the late night phone calls, between watching him with the kids and seeing him fight for her in court, she'd let him past every wall she'd built. And the terrifying part was that it felt right. "I need time," she said finally. "Everything's been so chaotic, so intense. I need to just be still for a while, to let life be normal." "I can give you time, all the time you need." Daniel stood, preparing to leave. "But Lena, don't let fear make your decisions for you. You've been brave about everything else. Be brave about this too." After he left, Lena sat alone in the darkness, her mind racing. She'd been alone for so long, had convinced herself that was just how her life would be. That romance and partnership were things other people got to have, not her. That her life was full enough with Ava. But the truth was, her life could hold more. Could hold someone who understood her, who supported her, who saw her not just as Ava's mother, but as a complete person with needs and desires of her own. The question was whether she was brave enough to reach for it. The adoption finalization hearing was scheduled for mid-December, exactly 90 days after Judge Hendricks's ruling. It was a formality more than anything. Patricia had assured her there would be no complications. But Lena still felt nervous as they walked into the courthouse. This time, Ava was with her. The little girl wore her best dress, the blue one with flowers that she'd picked out herself, and she held Lena's hand tightly as they climbed the courthouse steps. "Is this where you had your important meeting?" Ava asked. "Yes, sweetheart." "Are you going to have another one today?" "Sort of, but this one's different. This one is happy." Judge Hendricks smiled when they entered her chambers. "Ms. Carter, and this must be Ava." Ava nodded solemnly, then whispered to Lena, "Is she a queen?" The judge laughed. "Not quite, young lady, but I do get to wear a special robe, which is almost as good." The proceedings were brief and straightforward. Patricia presented the completed adoption paperwork, the background checks, the home study update. Judge Hendricks reviewed everything with the same thoroughness she'd brought to the custody case, then looked at Lena over her reading glasses. "Ms. Carter, do you understand that by finalizing this adoption, you will assume full legal rights and responsibilities for Ava? That you will be her mother in the eyes of the law, with all that entails?" "Yes, Your Honor, I understand." "And Ava," the judge addressed the little girl directly, "do you understand that Ms. Carter is going to be your legal mommy? That she'll take care of you and love you and be your family?" Ava looked up at Lena, confused. "But she already is my mommy." Judge Hendricks' expression softened. "You're absolutely right. She is. This just makes it official." She signed the final document with a flourish. "Congratulations, Ms. Carter. The adoption is finalized. Ava is legally your daughter." Lena felt tears streaming down her face, but this time they were tears of pure joy. She knelt down and pulled Ava into a tight hug. "I love you so much, baby girl." "I love you too, Mommy." It was the first time Ava had called her that. Not Lena, not Aunt Lena, just Mommy. And it was the most beautiful word Lena had ever heard. Outside the courthouse, Margaret was waiting with balloons and a homemade cake. Daniel and Max were there too, holding a sign that read, "Congratulations, Carter family," in Max's careful handwriting. "How did you know we'd be done at this time?" Lena asked, laughing through her tears. "Patricia texted," Daniel admitted. "We wanted to celebrate with you." They went back to Lena's house, which Margaret and Daniel had apparently decorated while they were at the courthouse. There were streamers and balloons, a banner across the living room, and enough food to feed a small army. As the afternoon wore on and the kids ran around the yard with Scout, Lena found herself standing in the kitchen with Daniel, both of them watching through the window. "This is what you fought for," Daniel said quietly. "This right here. Normal, happy, ordinary life. It doesn't feel ordinary to me. It feels like a miracle. Maybe that's what ordinary life is supposed to feel like. We just forget to notice it most of the time." Lena turned to face him. "Daniel, about what you said a few weeks ago, you don't have to—" "Let me finish." She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "You were right. I was scared. I am scared. But I'm tired of letting fear make my decisions. And the truth is, I don't want to do this alone anymore. Not because I can't, but because I don't want to. Because having you in my life has made everything better, lighter, more manageable. Because Ava lights up when she sees Max, and I light up when I see you, and I think—" Her voice wavered. "I think maybe we could be something more, if you still want that." Daniel's smile started slow, and then spread across his entire face. "I want that. I've wanted that for months. So what do we do now? Now we take it slow. We figure it out as we go. We let the kids adjust. We don't rush anything." He reached out and took her hand. "But we do it together." "Together," Lena repeated, and the word felt like a promise. That evening, after everyone had left and Ava was in bed, Lena sat down at her laptop for the first time in weeks without dread in her stomach. Instead, she opened a blank document and started writing. She wrote down her ideas for starting a small architectural consultation business, sketched out how she could build a portfolio slowly, taking on one or two projects at a time while still being present for Ava. Researched what licenses she'd need to reactivate, what continuing education courses she should take. For the first time in 6 years, she let herself dream about a future that included her own ambitions alongside being a mother. And it didn't feel selfish. It felt like coming back to life. Over the next few months, life settled into a new normal. Lena officially started her consultation business, taking on her first client, Margaret's nephew, who needed help designing an accessible home for his aging parents. It was small work, nothing glamorous, but Lena found herself falling in love with architecture all over again. Daniel and Lena began dating, though it looked different than traditional dating. There were no fancy restaurants or nights out. Instead, there were family dinners and trips to the park, homework help and bedtime stories, the slow building of a life that included all four of them. Max and Ava were delighted. They'd been hoping for exactly this outcome, had apparently been plotting ways to get their parents together for weeks. Finally, Max said, when Daniel told him they were officially together, Ava and I were starting to think you'd never figure it out. But they took it slow, mindful of the kids' needs and emotions. Daniel didn't rush to move in or push for immediate integration. Instead, they built their relationship the same way Lena had built her life with Ava, one day at a time, with patience and intention. One Saturday afternoon in early spring, 6 months after the adoption was finalized, Lena found herself in her backyard watching chaos unfold in the best possible way. Ava and Max were building an elaborate fort out of cardboard boxes while Scout supervised, occasionally stealing a box to chew on. Daniel was attempting to fix her perpetually broken fence, though he kept getting distracted by the kids' running commentary on his carpentry skills. Margaret sat beside Lena on the porch steps, both of them drinking lemonade and enjoying the show. "You look happy," Margaret said. Lena considered this. "I am. I didn't think I would be, not after everything. I thought I'd always be waiting for the other shoe to drop, but I'm starting to believe this is real, that it's mine to keep." "It is yours. You fought for it. You earned it." "I'm still scared sometimes," Lena admitted. "When Ava has a nightmare or gets sick, there's this moment where I panic, where I think about how close I came to losing her." "That's normal. That fear doesn't go away just because the legal battle is over. You love her too much for it to ever completely disappear." Margaret patted her hand. "But you can't let it run your life. You have to trust that you're enough, that what you've built together is strong enough to weather whatever comes." Daniel looked up from his work and caught Lena's eye, smiling. She smiled back, feeling that flutter in her chest that still surprised her sometimes. "What about him?" Margaret asked, following her gaze. "Are you going to let that get serious?" "It already is serious. We're just being careful about it." "Don't be too careful. Life's too short to spend it protecting yourself from happiness." Lena thought about that as the afternoon wore on, about how for so long she'd built walls around her heart, convinced that isolation was the price of keeping Ava safe. But maybe that had been wrong. Maybe strength didn't come from standing alone. Maybe it came from building connections, from letting people in, from creating a community that supported each other. That night, after the kids were asleep and Daniel was preparing to head home, Lena stopped him at the door. "Stay," she said. "What?" "Stay, not—" She blushed. "I don't mean like that. I just mean stay. Have breakfast with us in the morning. Be here when Ava wakes up. Stop going home every night like you're just visiting." Daniel studied her face. "Are you sure? That's a big step." "I'm sure. We're already doing this, building a life together. We're just doing it across 2 houses. Maybe it's time to stop pretending we're not a family." "A family," Daniel repeated, testing the word. "If you want that. If it's not too fast or too—" He kissed her, cutting off her nervous rambling. When he pulled back, his eyes were shining. "I want that. I've wanted that since the day you brought that injured dog into my clinic, and I saw how much you were capable of loving. So you'll stay?" "I'll stay." They told the kids the next morning over pancakes. Max and Ava exchanged a look that suggested they'd been expecting this announcement for weeks. Does this mean we're brother and sister now? Ava asked. Not officially, Daniel said, but kind of, yeah. Cool. Ava went back to her pancakes, apparently satisfied with this explanation. Max grinned at his dad. Does this mean we get Scout? Scout stays with Lena and Ava, but we get to visit him every day. Even better, all the fun, none of the vet bills. They all laughed, and Lena felt something settle in her chest. A sense of rightness, of completeness, of finally being exactly where she was meant to be. The integration wasn't always smooth. There were growing pains as they figured out logistics, navigated different parenting styles, and learned to communicate about things they'd always handled alone. Max struggled sometimes with sharing his dad's attention. Ava had moments of insecurity, worried that having Daniel and Max around meant Lena loved her less. But they worked through it together, with patience and honesty and a commitment to making it work. And slowly, the rough edges smoothed out. The four of them became a unit, a blended family that felt chosen rather than obligated. Lena's business grew steadily. Word spread about the architect who'd come out of retirement, and she started getting more inquiries than she could handle alone. She hired an assistant, then another. What had started as a small side project became a legitimate career again, one that she built around her life rather than the other way around. Daniel proposed on a Tuesday evening, nothing dramatic or elaborate. They were sitting on the back porch after dinner watching the kids play in the yard, and he just turned to her and said, "Marry me." Lena laughed. "That's it? That's your proposal? I could do something fancy if you want. Rose petals, a ring hidden in champagne, a string quartet." "No," Lena interrupted, still laughing. "This is perfect. You're perfect. Yes, I'll marry you." They kept the wedding small, just close friends and family in Margaret's backyard. Ava served as flower girl, taking her job so seriously that she counted out each petal she dropped to make sure they were evenly distributed. Max was the ring bearer, managing to get the rings to the altar despite Scout's attempts to steal them. Patricia came bringing tissues and poorly hidden tears. Judge Hendricks sent a card congratulating them and reminding Lena that she'd always known things would work out. Even Ryan Foster sent a brief note, not an apology exactly, but an acknowledgement that Ava was where she belonged. As Lena stood beside Daniel, promising to love and honor him for the rest of her life, she looked out at the small gathering of people who'd supported her through the hardest years. Margaret, who'd been her lifeline. Patricia, who'd fought for her. The teachers and neighbors and friends who'd testified on her behalf. And Ava, standing at the front in her fancy dress, grinning so wide her whole face lit up. This was what she'd fought for. Not just the legal right to raise her daughter, but the ability to build a full life around that role. To be a mother and a wife and a professional and a person, all at once, without having to choose between them. The judge performing the ceremony, not Hendricks but a friend of Daniel's, finished the vows and pronounced them married. Daniel kissed her as their small crowd cheered, and Lena felt something she'd never quite felt before, complete and utter peace. After the ceremony, as they were cutting the cake, Ava tugged on Lena's dress. "Mommy?" "Yes, sweetheart?" "Are we going to live with Daniel and Max now? Like, all together in one house?" "We are. How do you feel about that?" Ava considered this seriously. "I think it's good, because families are supposed to be together. And we're a family now, right?" Lena knelt down to her daughter's level, taking both her small hands. "We've always been a family, you and me, but now our family is bigger. Is that okay?" "It's better than okay. It's perfect." Ava threw her arms around Lena's neck. "I love you, Mommy. I love you too, baby. More than anything in the whole world." As the sun set on their wedding day, Lena stood watching her new husband play with both kids in the yard, Scout racing around their feet, and felt the weight of 6 years of fear finally, completely lift. She'd spent so long living in survival mode, focused only on protecting what she had, that she'd almost forgotten it was possible to thrive. But here she was, thriving, building a career she loved, raising a daughter who was happy and secure, married to a man who saw her as a complete person rather than just a mother. She had friends, community, a support system that would catch her if she fell. Margaret appeared beside her with 2 glasses of champagne. "To new beginnings," the older woman said, raising her glass. "To new beginnings," Lena echoed. They drank, and Lena let herself savor this moment. Let herself believe that the hard part was over, that what lay ahead was just the beautiful, ordinary work of living a full life. She'd fought her battle and won. Now it was time to enjoy the victory. The first year of their blended family brought challenges Lena hadn't anticipated. Small frictions that emerged when four people tried to become one household. There were arguments about bedtimes and chore charts, about whose turn it was to pick the movie, and whether Scout was allowed on the furniture. Max went through a phase where he resented sharing his father's attention, would snap at Ava over things that didn't matter, then feel guilty afterward. Ava had nightmares sometimes, dreams where Lena disappeared and she was left alone again, waking up crying and needing reassurance that her mother wasn't going anywhere. But they worked through each issue as it arose, sitting down as a family to talk things through, adjusting and adapting until they found rhythms that worked for everyone. Daniel proved to be patient and steady, never trying to replace Lena as Ava's parent, but being there as a supportive presence. And Lena learned to accept help, to trust that she didn't have to control everything to keep her daughter safe. On a crisp October morning, nearly 2 years after the wedding, Lena woke to find Daniel already up, standing at the bedroom window and staring out at the yard with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What's wrong?" she asked, sitting up. He turned, and she saw he was holding an envelope. "This came yesterday. I didn't want to show you until I'd figured out how to talk about it." Lena's stomach dropped. Letters rarely brought good news in her experience. "What is it?" Daniel handed it to her. It was from Ryan Foster's attorney, but the tone was different from anything they'd received before. Not adversarial or demanding, just a simple request for a meeting to discuss the possibility of limited contact with Ava, if and when Lena felt it was appropriate. "He's been persistent," Daniel said quietly. "This is the third letter in 6 months. Always respectful, never pushing, just asking to be considered." Lena's first instinct was to tear the letter up and throw it away. Ryan had given up any right to be part of Ava's life when he'd abandoned Emma. The custody battle had only reinforced that he cared more about ownership than actual parenting. But as she read the letter more carefully, she noticed something. It acknowledged his mistakes. It didn't make excuses or try to minimize what he'd done. It simply said that he understood he had no right to ask for anything, but that if there was ever a possibility of knowing his daughter, even in a small way, he wanted to be available for that. "What do you think?" she asked Daniel. "I think it's your decision. Ava is your daughter. But I also think—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I think that one day Ava might have questions about where she came from, about her biological father, and it might be easier for her to have those answers from someone who's willing to be honest than to wonder her whole life. So you think I should agree to this? I think you should consider it. Not for Ryan's sake, but for Ava's. When she's older, when she can understand the complexity of it." Daniel sat down beside her on the bed. "But I also know this is asking a lot of you. After what he put you through, you don't owe him anything." Lena folded the letter slowly, her mind working through the implications. The truth was, she'd always known this moment might come. Had known that Ava would eventually ask about her father, would want to understand that part of her history. And while Lena could tell her the facts, there was something different about hearing them from the person himself. "I need to think about it," she said finally. "Take all the time you need." Over the next few weeks, Lena wrestled with the decision. She talked to Patricia, who advised caution, but didn't dismiss the idea outright. She talked to Margaret, who surprisingly encouraged it, saying that closure was important for everyone involved. She even talked to the child psychologist who'd testified at the custody hearing, who pointed out that controlled contact might actually help Ava develop a more complete understanding of her identity as she grew older. But the person whose opinion mattered most was Ava herself, and she was still only 7 years old. Too young to make this decision, too young to fully understand what it would mean. One evening, Lena found herself sitting in Ava's room while her daughter worked on a school project about family trees. Ava had drawn Lena at the center, with Daniel and Max branching off to one side, and Margaret and other important people filling in the spaces around them. "What about here?" Ava asked, pointing to an empty space on the page. "Ms. Rodriguez said we should put our birth parents if we know them. But I don't know who my daddy was. Just that he left before I was born." Lena's heart clenched. This was the opening she needed, even though she hadn't been looking for it. You're right that your biological father left before you were born, Lena said carefully. But I do know who he is. His name is Ryan. Ava looked up with wide eyes. You know him? I met him once, a long time ago. He was your mom Emma's boyfriend. Why did he leave? This was the hardest part, finding a way to explain adult failings to a child without damaging her sense of self-worth. Sometimes people get scared when big things happen. Having a baby is a very big thing, and Ryan wasn't ready for it. So he made a choice to leave, which wasn't fair to Emma or to you. But it was about him being scared, not about you not being lovable. Ava processed this with the seriousness she brought to everything. Is he still alive? Yes. He lives in the city with his wife. Does he know about me now? He does. Does he want to meet me? Lena took a deep breath. He's asked if that might be possible someday, but it would only happen if you wanted it, and only when you're ready. There's no pressure, sweetheart. You have me and Daniel and Max, and we're your family no matter what. Ava returned her attention to the family tree, adding Ryan's name to the empty space, but not drawing any connecting lines to herself. Can I think about it? You can take all the time you need. This isn't something we have to decide right now. But over the following months, Ava brought it up occasionally. Small questions about what Ryan looked like, what he did for work, whether he had other children. Each time, Lena answered honestly but without embellishment, letting Ava lead the conversation. Finally, on a quiet Sunday morning in early spring, Ava came to Lena with a direct question. If I wanted to meet Ryan, just once, would that be okay? Lena's instinct was to say no, to protect her daughter from potential disappointment or hurt. But she'd learned over the years that protection sometimes meant letting people make their own choices, even when those choices carried risk. If that's what you really want, then yes, we can arrange it. Would you be there? Every second. I wouldn't leave you alone with him. And it doesn't mean he's my dad, right? Because Daniel is my dad now, even if it's different from Max. Lena pulled Ava close. That's exactly right. Daniel is your dad in all the ways that matter. Ryan is just the person who helped create you. Those are two very different things. The meeting was arranged for a neutral location, a family counseling office that specialized in reunification cases. Patricia came along as a legal observer, and Daniel waited in the parking lot, ready to step in if needed. The counselor, Dr. Sarah Chen, met with Lena and Ava first, explaining what would happen and making sure Ava understood she could end the meeting at any time. When Ryan walked in, Lena had to work to keep her expression neutral. He looked older, more worn than the last time she'd seen him in court. His wife Jessica wasn't with him, respecting the agreement that this first meeting would be just Ryan and Ava, with Lena present. Ryan's eyes went immediately to Ava, and Lena saw something flicker across his face. Recognition, regret, something she couldn't quite name. He sat down in the chair Dr. Chen indicated, keeping a respectful distance. "Hello, Ava," he said quietly. "Thank you for agreeing to meet me." Ava looked at him with the direct, assessing gaze of childhood. "You look different than I thought you would." "Yeah? What did you think I'd look like? Taller and meaner?" Ryan flinched slightly. "I understand why you might think that. I did some things that were mean, even if I didn't mean them that way. Mommy says you got scared when you found out about me." "That's true. I was very scared. But that wasn't a good excuse for leaving. I should have stayed and been there for your mom, Emma, and for you." Ava considered this. "Why are you here now?" "Because I wanted you to know that even though I haven't been part of your life, you exist in the world, and that matters. And I wanted to apologize for not being the father I should have been." "You're not my father," Ava said matter-of-factly. "Daniel is my father. You're just Ryan." Lena saw Ryan's eyes fill with tears, but he nodded. "You're right. I'm just Ryan. But I'm glad I got to meet you, even if it's just this once." The meeting lasted less than 30 minutes. Ava asked a few more questions, whether Ryan liked dogs, what his favorite color was, basic things that helped her fill in the picture of who this person was. Ryan answered everything honestly, never trying to make himself seem better than he was, never making promises he might not keep. At the end, Dr. Chen asked Ava if she'd like to meet with Ryan again sometime. Ava looked at Lena, then back at Ryan. "Maybe, but not soon. I need to think about it more." "That's perfectly fine," Ryan said. "Thank you for giving me this chance. It means more than you know. In the car afterward, Ava was quiet. Lena didn't push, just drove them home and let her daughter process in her own time. It wasn't until bedtime that Ava finally spoke about it. "He seems sad," she said as Lena tucked her in. "I think he probably is sad. He missed out on knowing you, and that's his loss." "Do you think he's sorry? Like, really sorry?" Lena thought about the tears in Ryan's eyes, the way his voice had cracked when Ava said he wasn't her father. "Yeah, sweetheart. I think he really is sorry." "Good. He should be." Ava snuggled down under her blankets. "I'm glad I met him, though. Now I know, and I don't have to wonder anymore." "How do you feel about everything?" "I feel like I'm lucky, because even though Ryan didn't want to be my dad, you wanted to be my mom. And that's better, anyway." Lena kissed her forehead, her heart so full it ached. "You've got that exactly right." Over the following year, Ava asked to see Ryan twice more, brief supervised meetings where they talked about surface-level things and built a tentative acquaintance that wasn't a relationship, but also wasn't complete absence. Jessica came to the third meeting, and Ava liked her, appreciated her genuine warmth, and the fact that she didn't try to be anything other than Ryan's wife, who was glad to meet her. But Ava never called Ryan Dad, never expressed interest in spending extended time with him, never wanted him integrated into her daily life. He remained a peripheral figure, someone she knew and could ask questions of, but not someone central to her world. And Ryan seemed to accept that. He sent birthday cards but didn't push for birthday parties. He asked how school was going but didn't request report cards. He respected the boundaries Lena set and seemed genuinely grateful for whatever small access he was given. "He's doing the right thing now," Daniel observed one evening after Ava had gone to bed, "even if it's years too late." "Do you think I should give him more access?" Lena asked. "I think you're giving Ava exactly what she needs, the truth, the opportunity to know him on her terms, and the security of knowing her real family isn't going anywhere. That's all anyone can ask for." Lena's architectural business continued to grow, eventually requiring her to rent a small office in town and hire 2 full-time employees. She specialized in residential design for families with special needs, accessible homes, sensory-friendly spaces, layouts that accommodated wheelchairs or autism, or any number of challenges that standard houses didn't consider. It was meaningful work, the kind that reminded her why she'd fallen in love with architecture in the first place. And it was flexible work, allowing her to attend Ava's school events and be home for dinner and maintain the balance between career and family that she'd fought so hard to achieve. Daniel's veterinary practice thrived as well, and they became known around town as the couple who'd beaten the odds, who'd built a family from broken pieces and made something beautiful from it. Margaret grew older, eventually needing more help than she could manage alone. Without hesitation, Lena and Daniel converted their garage into a small apartment and invited her to move in. She became an integral part of their household, the grandmother Ava had never had, the wise presence who knew when to offer advice and when to just listen. Max graduated from high school with honors and headed off to veterinary school, following in his father's footsteps. Ava was devastated to see him go, had cried for days before he left, but Max promised to call every week and come home for holidays. "You're not losing me, Squirt," he told her on the day he left for college. "I'm just expanding the territory. Someone's got to go out there and make the world better for you." "You already made it better just by being my brother," Ava said, and Max hugged her tight, his own eyes suspiciously bright. The years passed in a blur of ordinary moments that felt extraordinary because Lena had learned to recognize them as such. First days of school and lost teeth, science fair projects and soccer games, family dinners where everyone talked over each other, and lazy Sunday mornings where they didn't talk at all. When Ava turned 13, she asked if she could write a school essay about her adoption. Lena agreed, curious what perspective her daughter would bring to the story. Reading the finished essay brought tears to Lena's eyes. Ava had written about being chosen, about how adoption meant someone had actively decided to love her rather than just being stuck with her by biology. She wrote about the courage it took for Lena to fight for her, about feeling secure because she knew her mother would never give up on her. The essay won a regional contest, and Ava was asked to read it at an award ceremony. Lena sat in the audience beside Daniel, holding his hand, listening to her daughter speak about love and family and belonging with a maturity that took her breath away. "That's our girl," Daniel whispered, and Lena nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. After the ceremony, a woman approached them in the parking lot. She was young, maybe mid-20s, and she looked nervous. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said, "but I heard your daughter's essay, and I just had to say something. I'm in a similar situation. My sister died 6 months ago and left behind a baby. I'm trying to get custody, but it's so hard, and I don't know if I'm doing the right thing. Hearing your story, hearing how it turned out for you, it gave me hope." Lena felt something shift in her chest. She'd been so focused on her own journey that she hadn't thought about how it might help others facing similar challenges. "You are doing the right thing," Lena said firmly. "It's going to be hard, harder than you can imagine. But if you love that baby and you're willing to show up every single day, that's what matters. Do you have a lawyer?" The woman shook her head. "I can't afford one." Lena pulled out her phone. "I'm going to give you a name, Patricia Chen. Tell her I sent you. She'll help." Over the following years, it became a pattern. People would reach out, having heard Lena's story somehow, asking for advice or resources, or just reassurance that they were doing the right thing. Lena helped when she could, connecting people with lawyers and support groups, testifying in court when it was relevant, becoming an unexpected advocate for kinship adoption. "You should write a book," Margaret suggested one evening. "Share what you've learned. Help people who are going through what you went through." Lena considered it. She'd never thought of herself as a writer, but she had a story that might matter to people who needed it. So she started writing, carving out time in the early mornings before everyone else woke up, documenting not just the custody battle, but the entire journey of learning to be a mother while building a life from scratch. The book took 3 years to write and another year to publish. But when it finally came out, the response was overwhelming. Letters poured in from guardians and adoptive parents, from people fighting custody battles and people who'd won them, from children who'd been raised by aunts or uncles or grandparents and wanted to say thank you for telling their story. Lena was invited to speak at conferences, to consult with family law organizations, to help shape policy around kinship care. It was never something she'd planned, but it felt right. Like her struggle had purpose beyond just her own family. "You're making a difference," Daniel said one night, watching her sort through yet another stack of letters. "A real difference in people's lives. It still feels surreal sometimes, like this isn't really my life. It is your life. You just finally let yourself live it." Ava graduated from high school at the top of her class, with scholarship offers from multiple universities. She'd grown into a confident, compassionate young woman who wanted to study social work, to help children in situations like the one she'd been in. "I want to be the person who fights for kids who need someone to fight for them," she told Lena, "like you fought for me." The night before Ava left for college, Lena found her sitting on the back porch with Scout, who was old and gray now but still devoted to the girl who'd named him all those years ago. "You okay?" Lena asked, sitting down beside her. "Just thinking about how different everything could have been. If you hadn't said yes that night at the hospital. If you'd decided raising me was too hard. If you'd given up during the custody battle." "I would never have given up. Not in a million years." "I know. That's what makes you who you are." Ava leaned her head on Lena's shoulder. "I'm going to miss this. Miss home. Home will be here whenever you need it. And you're going to do amazing things out there, Ava. You're going to change lives. I learned from the best." They sat together in the darkness, mother and daughter, watching fireflies dance across the yard. In the house behind them, Daniel was helping Max pack his car for a visit home, their voices carrying through the open windows. Margaret was in her apartment, probably reading or watching one of her shows. The life Lena had built hummed around them, solid and real and permanent. "Mom?" Ava said, using the title that had become natural somewhere along the way. "Thank you for everything, for choosing me." "You don't have to thank me for loving you. That was never a choice. It was just a fact." Ava was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Do you ever regret it? Everything you gave up?" Lena thought about her old life, the career she'd abandoned, the relationships that had faded, the version of herself she'd been before Ava. That person felt like a stranger now, someone she'd known briefly but didn't really understand. "Not for a single second," she said honestly. "You didn't take anything from me, Ava. You gave me everything that matters." The months after Ava left for college were an adjustment. The house felt too quiet, too empty, even with Daniel and Margaret still there. Lena threw herself into her work, into her advocacy, into filling the space Ava had left behind. But she also gave herself permission to grieve the passage of time, to miss the little girl who'd needed her for everything while being proud of the young woman who was learning to navigate the world on her own. "This is what we raised them for," Daniel reminded her one night when she was particularly melancholy. "To leave, to build their own lives. We didn't fail. We succeeded." "I know. It just hurts anyway. It's supposed to hurt. That's how you know you did it right." On what would have been Emma's 40th birthday, Lena visited her sister's grave for the first time in years. She brought flowers and sat on the grass beside the headstone, talking to Emma the way she used to when they were young. "She's incredible," Lena said. "Your daughter. She's smart and kind and so full of purpose. She looks like you, has your smile, your way of making everyone around her feel seen. I think you'd be proud of who she's become." The wind rustled through the trees, and Lena let herself imagine it was Emma's way of responding, of saying thank you, of saying well done, of saying it was okay to let go of the guilt she'd carried for so long about not being the mother Emma would have been. "I did my best," Lena continued. "It wasn't perfect. I made mistakes, probably lots of them. But I loved her with everything I had. I hope that was enough." She stayed until the sun began to set, then drove home to the family that was waiting for her. Daniel had made dinner, and Margaret had set the table, and they ate together the way they had for years, comfortable in each other's presence. That night, Lena received a text from Ava. "Just finished my first week of classes. Social work is going to be harder than I thought, but I love it. Missing you guys. Give Scout extra pets for me." Lena smiled and typed back. "Scout is offended. You think he doesn't get enough pets already? We love you. Call this weekend?" "Definitely. Love you, Mom." Lena set down her phone and looked around at her life, the home she'd built, the career she'd reclaimed, the family she'd created. It hadn't been the path she'd planned, hadn't been the journey she'd expected, but it had been hers, every step of it, and she'd walked it with courage and love and an unwavering commitment to doing right by the little girl who'd been placed in her arms 17 years ago. She thought about the woman she'd been that night in the hospital, terrified and uncertain, but willing to say yes anyway. That woman would be proud of who she'd become, would be amazed at what they'd accomplished together. Years continued to pass, marked by milestones and ordinary days alike. Ava graduated from college and got her first job at a family services agency. Max took over his father's veterinary practice when Daniel decided to semi-retire. Margaret celebrated her 90th birthday surrounded by the family she'd helped raise. Ryan sent a letter when Ava graduated, congratulating her and thanking Lena for allowing him the small glimpses of his daughter's life over the years. He didn't ask for more, didn't push for a relationship that had never quite formed. He just acknowledged what was and expressed gratitude for it. Lena wrote back, a brief note that said she was glad he'd gotten to know Ava, even in a limited way, and that she hoped he'd found peace with his choices. It felt like the closing of a chapter, the final resolution of a conflict that had defined so much of her life. On Lena's 50th birthday, Daniel organized a surprise party that brought together everyone who'd been part of their journey. Patricia came, now retired but still sharp as ever. Mrs. Morrison, Ava's old kindergarten teacher, drove in from 2 states away. Friends from the adoption advocacy world, clients from her architectural firm, neighbors and colleagues, and the community that had embraced their unconventional family. And at the center of it all were Ava and Max, now adults with lives of their own, but still tied to this place, to these people, to the family that had formed around unexpected circumstances and grown into something beautiful. "Speech," someone called out, and the crowd took up the chant. Lena stood reluctantly, never comfortable being the center of attention. But looking around at all these faces, all these people who touched her life in meaningful ways, she felt like she owed them something. "I'm not good at speeches," she began, "so I'll keep this short. 17 years ago, I made a decision that changed my entire life. I said yes to raising my sister's baby, even though I had no idea what I was doing, even though I was terrified I'd fail her. And for a long time, I thought I had to do it alone. Thought asking for help was weakness. Thought isolation was the price of keeping her safe." She looked at Daniel, who smiled encouragingly. "But I was wrong. The strongest thing I ever did was let people in. Let Daniel love me. Let Margaret be our family. Let Patricia fight for us. Let this community support us when we needed it most. Her eyes found Ava in the crowd. And the best thing I ever did was trust that love was enough, that showing up every day, even when it was hard, was what mattered. Ava didn't need me to be perfect. She just needed me to be present, to be hers. Lena's voice caught, but she pushed through. So thank you, all of you, for being part of our story, for helping us write a better ending than I ever imagined possible, for teaching me that family isn't just who you're born to, it's who shows up, who stays, who fights for you when you can't fight for yourself. She raised her glass, to showing up, to staying, to fighting for the people we love. To showing up, the crowd echoed, and the sound filled the room like a promise. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet again, Lena found Ava sitting on the back porch, the same spot where they'd had so many important conversations over the years. "You okay?" Lena asked, settling beside her. "Just thinking about your speech, about how you said you were terrified you'd fail me." "I was, every single day, especially at the beginning. But you never did, never even came close." Lena smiled. "I made plenty of mistakes, sweetheart. Probably more than you remember." "Maybe. But you never failed at the thing that mattered most, making me feel loved, making me feel like I belonged somewhere, with someone." Ava turned to face her. "I'm starting to understand what that took. Now that I'm working with families, seeing how hard it is, how much it requires, and it makes me appreciate even more what you sacrificed for me." "It wasn't sacrifice, it was investment, and I got back 100 times what I put in." They sat together in comfortable silence, the kind of silence only possible between people who knew each other completely. Scout, ancient now and mostly blind, padded out and collapsed at their feet with a contented sigh. "I've been thinking about something," Ava said after a while. "When I have kids someday, I want to name my daughter Emma, after my birth mom, if that's okay with you." Lena felt tears prick her eyes. "I think that would be beautiful. Emma would have loved that. And I want to ask you to help raise them, not like full-time parenting, but like you and Margaret were for me. That special grandparent role where you get all the fun parts and can hand them back when they get fussy." "I would be honored." "Good, because you're going to be an amazing grandmother, just like you were an amazing mother." The words settled over them, warm and right. Mother. It had taken years for it to become natural, for the legal reality to match the emotional truth. But somewhere along the way, it had become simply fact. Lena wasn't Ava's aunt who raised her. She was her mother, full stop, in every way that mattered. "I love you, Ava," Lena said. "I love you too, Mom." As the years rolled on, Lena watched her daughter build the kind of life she'd once dreamed of for herself. Meaningful work, deep relationships, a sense of purpose. Ava met someone, fell in love, got married in the same backyard where Lena and Daniel had exchanged vows all those years ago. And when Ava's first child was born, a daughter they named Emma Grace, Lena held that tiny person and felt the circle complete itself. This was what she'd fought for. Not just the right to raise Ava, but the chance to build a legacy that extended beyond her own life. To create a family tree with deep roots and strong branches, one that would continue long after she was gone. Margaret passed away peacefully in her sleep at 93, surrounded by photos of the family she'd helped raise. At her funeral, Lena spoke about how Margaret had been there when she needed someone most, had offered support without judgment, had shown her what unconditional love looked like. "She taught me that family isn't just blood," Lena said. "It's choice. It's showing up. It's loving someone not because you have to, but because you want to. Because they matter to you and you refuse to let them face the world alone." Daniel retired fully when he was 65, handing over the veterinary practice to Max, and finally having time to pursue the hobbies he'd always put off. He and Lena traveled, visited Ava and her growing family, volunteered together at the animal shelter where a new generation of injured strays found second chances. Scout passed away at 16, in remarkable age for a dog who'd been half dead when they found him. They buried him in the backyard under the oak tree where he'd spent countless hours supervising the children's play. Ava came home for the burial, and they all stood together, Lena, Daniel, Ava, Max, and little Emma, saying goodbye to the dog who'd brought them together. "He had a good life," Max said, his voice thick. "Better than most." "He deserved it," Ava added. He saved us as much as we saved him. On what would have been Emma's 55th birthday, Lena visited her grave again, this time bringing her granddaughter. Little Emma was 4 now, bright and curious and full of questions. "Who's this?" she asked, pointing to the headstone. "This is your namesake, my sister Emma, your mommy's birth mother." "Is she in heaven?" Lena considered how to answer. "I think she's wherever good people go when they die, a place where she can see us and know we're okay." "Do you think she knows about me?" "I think she does, and I think she's very happy that you exist." Emma seemed satisfied with this answer, and they laid flowers together before heading home. When Lena turned 65, she finally allowed herself to slow down. She sold her architectural firm to her employees, ensuring the work would continue, but freeing herself from the daily responsibilities. She kept her advocacy work, but at a more manageable pace, mentoring others rather than carrying the full load herself. And she spent time with Daniel, just the two of them, rediscovering each other after years of being so focused on raising children and building careers. They took long walks, had lazy mornings reading in bed, traveled to places they'd always wanted to see. They'd spent decades being parents and professionals. Now they got to just be themselves. One evening, sitting on the porch that had witnessed so many important moments, Daniel asked her a question. "If you could go back to that night at the hospital, knowing everything you know now, would you still say yes?" Lena didn't even have to think about it. In a heartbeat, every struggle, every sleepless night, every moment of fear, it was all worth it. Ava was worth it. This life was worth it. No regrets? None. You? Daniel smiled. Just one. What's that? That I didn't meet you sooner. That I wasn't there for those first years when you were doing it all alone. You were there when I needed you. That's what matters. As the sun set over the yard where their family had grown and changed and thrived, Lena thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The scared young woman who'd said yes to an impossible situation. The isolated guardian who'd thought she had to do everything alone. The fighter who'd stood in a courtroom and refused to let anyone take her daughter away. She'd become all of those people and more, had grown into someone she never imagined she could be. And she'd done it one day at a time, one choice at a time, one act of love at a time. Ava called that evening, as she did every Sunday, and they talked for an hour about everything and nothing. Emma had started preschool and was asking for a puppy. Ava's husband had gotten a promotion. They were thinking about trying for a second child. Ordinary life. Beautiful, messy, imperfect, ordinary life. After they hung up, Lena looked at Daniel and said, "We did okay, didn't we? With the kids, with everything? We did better than okay. We did great. I still worry sometimes that I didn't do enough, that I should have." "Lena," Daniel took her hand. "Look at our kids. Really look at them. They're happy, healthy, successful, kind. They know how to love, how to fight for what matters, how to show up for the people they care about. We gave them that. You gave them that." He was right. Lena could see the evidence of it every time she watched Ava parent Emma, every time Max talked about his work, every time they called just to check in or share good news or ask advice. They were good people doing good work in the world, and she'd had a hand in shaping them into who they'd become. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Years later, when Lena was in her 70s and her grandchildren numbered 4, she finally wrote the ending to the book she'd started so long ago. It was a single paragraph added to the final chapter that summed up everything she'd learned. "Love isn't always a feeling," she wrote. "Sometimes it's a choice you make over and over again, especially when it's hard. It's showing up when you'd rather run away. It's fighting when you're tired of fighting. It's believing that someone else's well-being matters more than your own comfort. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, that choice transforms not just the person you're choosing to love, but yourself as well. You become stronger, braver, more capable than you ever imagined. You become the person you needed when you were at your weakest. And that, more than anything, is what makes it all worthwhile." On her final reading tour for the updated edition, a young woman approached her after the event. She was holding a toddler and looked exhausted, overwhelmed, on the edge of giving up. "My sister died," the woman said without preamble. "Car accident. Left behind this little guy. I'm trying to raise him, but I don't know if I can do this. Everyone says I should put him in foster care, that I'm too young, that I'm throwing my life away. And some days I think they're right." Lena looked at the child, who gazed back with wide, solemn eyes. She thought about Ava at that age, about the nights she'd wondered if she was enough, if she could really do this. "Can you do this?" Lena repeated. "Maybe not. It's going to be the hardest thing you've ever done. You'll sacrifice things you can't imagine giving up right now. You'll be lonely and scared and convinced you're failing." The woman's face fell, and Lena realized she'd misunderstood. "But," Lena continued, "you'll also experience a kind of love that transforms everything. You'll watch this child grow up knowing he matters to someone. You'll become stronger than you ever thought possible. And one day, 20 years from now, you'll look back and realize that saying yes to him was the best decision you ever made." She reached out and squeezed the woman's hand. "You don't have to be perfect. You just have to show up. Can you do that?" The woman looked down at the child in her arms, and Lena saw the exact moment she made her choice. Saw the fear transform into determination, the uncertainty into resolve. "Yeah," the woman said, "I can do that." "Then you'll be fine. Better than fine. You'll be exactly what he needs." As Lena watched the woman walk away, she felt the weight of all those years settle over her like a warm blanket. This was her legacy. Not just Ava, not just her grandchildren, but every person she'd helped along the way. Every guardian she'd encouraged, every adoption she'd facilitated, every child who got to stay with the person who loved them most. Daniel was waiting by the car, and they drove home together through the familiar streets of Maplewood, the town that had witnessed their entire journey. Past the courthouse where she'd fought for Ava, past the veterinary clinic where they'd met, past the park where their family had spent countless afternoons. Home was a smaller house now. They'd downsized when the kids moved out, but it still felt like the center of everything. Still held all the memories that mattered. That night, Lena lay in bed beside Daniel, listening to him breathe in the darkness. Her body was older now, slower, carrying the weight of decades. But her heart felt light, unburdened by regret or doubt. She'd lived a good life. Not an easy one, but a good one. She'd loved fiercely and completely. She'd fought for what mattered. She'd shown up day after day, year after year, even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. And in the end, that was all anyone could do. Show up, choose love, fight for the people who needed fighting for. It was enough. It had always been enough. Lena closed her eyes and drifted toward sleep, secure in the knowledge that the family she'd built, through blood and choice, through biology and love, through sheer stubborn determination, would continue long after she was gone, that the ripples of her choice that night in the hospital would extend outward, touching lives she'd never meet, shaping futures she'd never see. She had been alone once, standing in a hospital corridor with a 3-month-old baby and a choice to make. But she'd said yes, and that single word had changed everything. It had been the scariest yes of her life, and the best.